Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I hope you guys are doing all right today. I'm sorry, I was laughing at something that Navy vet said. That is the funniest thing in the world to me. But no, I hope you guys are having a good Friday. This is Friday. We've come to the end of the week. What is going on with this? There's something weird about this. Okay, I need to fix that because that is screwing with me. All right. I'm glad you guys are doing all right, and I'm glad you guys are having a good morning up to this point. As I always tell you, you have my deepest appreciation for being here. You could be anywhere, and I think this is too far, so it's going to sound. I had a technical glitch that I was trying to resolve before this started. No whammies, no whammies, no whammies, no whammies. Good. I always tell you can be anywhere, so the fact that you're under this voice, you have my deepest appreciation for being under this voice. My guest was here. He will be back hopefully shortly. He's supposed to be on at 7:15. We have a damn good show for you today. Jason Smith is going to be on the show. We're also going to have Ray McGovern. He's going to be on at 9. Arnaud Develay, he's going to be on at 8. There's also another really good guest that is going to start joining us. I just need to get him on the show. Mina Uncensored. Now, you've probably seen him on Twitter. And I tried to get him to come on to the show earlier. He wasn't able to do so, but at some point, hopefully, he will be joining us. In fact, I'm trying to get him to join us over the weekend. By the way, do I sound okay? No weirdness with the sound, no echo, no bizarre stuff. I just want to make sure the moment that you touch that mic loses cohesion sometimes. But can you guys hear me okay? Sound check, sound check, sound check. My mic sounds nice. Check 1. My mic sounds nice. Check 2. Are you ready? I'm telling my age. Let me see. U.S. Navy vet. He said, yeah, when I saw that clip, that dude on stage running around like he was in heavy metal band, like he was the name. What is this? That band that found the one Iron Maiden. I couldn't believe 20 billion likes. They got 20 billion likes. That can't be right. They're not even 20 billion people. They got 20 billion something. Yeah, that's funny. That is very funny to me. Interesting news. In fact, there are a few interesting news bits that have taken place. 1, Ukraine. Apparently, I don't know if you guys have been seeing this online. So online, as Ukraine was hitting the Russian energy sector, and this was something that I brought up with Mark, right? Where I was like, Mark, so Russia's not changing policy, right? It's just going to keep doing what it's doing. Mark said they're not changing policy. They have a plan. They're going to continue with the plan. And you would see these Ukrainian supporters screaming, another Russian energy grid goes down. Russia's going to be in the dark. And they were so excited about it. It was like, Belgorod is going to be in the dark tonight. This is a great thing. We are moving along. Don't believe the myth that Ukraine is losing this war. And you saw them all over the place, just screaming this at the height of their lungs. And then Russia started to assert itself. And what you saw was Russia going after energy infrastructure. Now, Russia has drones that automatically, without a human being, very Black Mirror stuff, find a train, lock onto that train, and blow up that train. And it's not really the train. It's kind of the preventing materials from going from point A to point B by rail. And so without needing a person looking at it, the AI says, hey, that's a train. If then, blow it up. And it would go about blowing that train up. It was amazing to watch. They even had helicopters trying to defend it, and it didn't necessarily work. This is also them going after various energy sectors. Now, after a few days of this, those same people start screaming, oh my God, the Russians are destroying our energy sector. And you get Zelensky coming out screaming at the top of his lungs, we should have a ceasefire on air attacks. And we need Donald Trump to help us do that. So when you were doing these pinprick attacks on the energy sector for Russia, this is winning the war. When Russia responds, oh my God, the world is ending. The wild part about it is Russia has been ending the world in the context of Ukraine's energy sector. And I didn't realize how extensive this was until Bloomberg came out with a report that like 60% of Ukraine's ability to produce energy has been destroyed, completely obliterated. Now, and just don't take my word for it. This is not Bloomberg, but they were landing on Bloomberg. Bloomberg is behind a paywall, and so got to get in where you fit in. Russian airstrikes knock out 60% of Ukraine's gas-producing energy infrastructure. Think about what that means. Think about what that means. It is, 80 degrees, 89 degrees here at like 10 o'clock at night, or what time is it? 6:30, about 6:15, 6:10. It's about 89 degrees. Even at night, it may get to be 80. And then, of course, then you rinse and repeat, which is why you see me sometimes sweating bullets at times. It is not that way in Ukraine, and it's not that way in Russia. And considering we're going to the winter months, you can imagine the need for energy is going to skyrocket. And the moment that you've effectively destroyed the capability of producing energy for themselves, question, where do you get the energy, right? Like, meaning you need to keep the houses warm. You need to keep the lights on. You need to have batteries for your, sexual devices or whatever. You need energy for those things. And if you need energy for those things, and you tend to get those things from, let's say, oil, uranium, etc., well, if they've taken out 60% of your capabilities of doing that, then that means you are reliant upon a third party to get that energy in some particular fashion, in some particular way, because you no longer have the ability to do it. Now, I have made this argument. I've made this strident argument that part and parcel to the reason that Putin is not more aggressive in this conflict. I know some people consider it weakness, and it bugs the hell out of me sometimes myself. But the argument that I made in the past was that maybe part of that rationale, and there may be several rationales to it, but part of that rationale is we are destroying Europe capability of a future war. And if Europe, who's already struggling with budgets, struggling with their own energy needs and requirements, and now have to supply Ukraine, what does that mean? What does that mean? But put that to the side. My guest is here, so I want to go to my guest. We are joined with the man himself, Jason Smith. How you doing, Jason? You doing okay this evening for us?
I'm all the better for you having me on your show, sir.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Jason Smith, he's a journalist, author, radio show host, podcaster, media commentator. His latest book is entitled A World Without Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future. Jason, you blew my mind in that last show, and apparently you blew a lot of people's minds because I was reading the comments of the videos. I am one of those rare YouTubers who read the comments, some of which I discard, other of which I take to heart. And in your case, there were people who were just flabbergasted. They were flabbergasted. Just at a comparative difference in the way the societies effectively operate and the things and the cost of those various societies. And it's just, some of that stuff is just mind-blowing. So thank you again for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's not me that's mind-blowing. It's China. I just happen to be observing.
Fair enough. Fair enough, the watcher. Something happened recently that is also rather mind-blowing. The United States tried to, when Donald Trump decided he wanted to have the sanction war, believed that it was in a position of authority, and in that position of authority could apply pressure to China. We're going to have tariffs that are, 250% or some weird number. We're going to try to destroy China's ability to make high technology, in which case Joe Biden comes out with the CHIP Act and Joe Biden puts restraints on chips and everything else. Come to find out, the US is not the one that knocks on this issue. China is the one that knocks. And as evidence of that, they put out, we're not going to call it sanctions, we're going to call it limits. Let's call it limits on not just chips, or not just rare earth minerals. So, but also things like graphite, lithium, etc. I did not know this, but China apparently has like 90% of graphite market, 2/3 of the lithium market, 90% of the rare earth mineral market, including the refining capabilities of that. That part I did know. But they've extended it to not just the minerals themselves, but to processes of those minerals, which fundamentally creates a choke point. This came out, I believe this was either yesterday or day before yesterday, and Warwick Powell, a guest of the show, also gave a damn good article on this, and I'm going to have work on to kind of break down the numbers or the metrics for it. But right here, China will review on a case-by-case basis rare earth element or export applications for advanced chips and military AI development. And it points out China bans export of technologies related to assembly, commissioning, maintenance, repair, upgrading of production lines for rare earth minerals, refining metals, smelting, magnetic, manufacturing, and recycling. So this is not just, hey, we're putting, let's say, limits on rare earths. We're putting limits on even processes of those rare earths. That's pretty amazing. What brought this on? Because this seemed to be out of the blue.
I think that's the way the American media wants to portray it. If they don't understand why, then that just gives me less faith in the American media. But there's a lot of intelligent people there who are China watchers. So I'm assuming that most people in the US government and most people in the US media actually know that this wasn't out of the blue, as I think you suspect. The reality is this is tit for tat. The United States went after China with semiconductors. The former Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, referred to her own work in attempting to cut off semiconductors from China as, quote, a fool's errand. Those were her words as she exited the cabinet position that she held when she was the one responsible for trying to cut off semiconductors to China. And there are several amusing anecdotal stories about that. When she came to China for her first official visit as a cabinet minister, one of the Huawei phones was released that had a very advanced semiconductor chip that the United States didn't think China had the ability to manufacture that fast, but in fact it had. And a lot of people joking, not the official company, but a lot of people made banners of her face and said, Gina Raimondo uses Huawei phones and so forth, sort of poke at her. But I think she realized that Biden had sent her on this ridiculous mission that was impossible because China had the ability to catch up in semiconductors in a few years. A lot of people in the United States said it would take 10 years, but China in some ways is already caught up because they're able to stack semiconductors in a certain kind of way and get similar levels of efficiency. And in some ways, China is getting ready to leapfrog silicon technology to other kinds of technologies, to even faster semiconductors than are currently manufactured. The West still holds, the record for speed in semiconductors and manufacturing really small semiconductors at scale. But most of those are actually not practical. They wouldn't put them in your phone anyway. And they wouldn't put them in a missile either, because a missile needs actually a much larger kind of semiconductor, which China actually is the leader in manufacturing in the world. But China does, and it's not just rare earth minerals. They're all over the world. And the United States has a lot of them actually at home, and there are countries around the world with enormous supplies of rare earth minerals. It is the manufacturing and the processing, which sometimes can go through 100 different chemical permutations before they get to the final product, in order to separate them out from everything else that they're mixed in with when they come out of the earth. China began developing this capability in the early 1980s, and it took that long from then to now to build the largest supply chain and technology in the world. There are 36 universities in China that offer majors in the processing of rare earth minerals, whereas there are 0 in the United States. So it's not just the rare earth minerals and it's not just the processing, but it's all of this technology that China has innovated, and China controls this technology. So if the United States wants to play, oh, we're going to tariff you to death, China is just saying, this is what we will do back. And so China is really doing tit for tat. There's a really good example that points out exactly China's tit for tat, and it just happened because about 2 months ago, the United States attempted to impose fees for vessels that were owned by Chinese companies going to U.S. ports. So I think it was today or yesterday, China also said, we're going to impose fees for vessels and companies coming to Chinese ports. So all China is doing is just holding a mirror up to the United States and saying, this is what you're doing, but we can do it better. And China, like you said, like you.
Come on. Come back. He'll be back. There you are. Okay, good. You froze for a little bit, or I don't. This may be a perspective thing. I don't know if it was I froze or you froze, but it's perfectly okay. Yeah, it's like I'm the one who knocks, right? It's just one of those things. Warwick points out in his article, he says the new Chinese restrictions announced on October 9th, 2025 extend beyond commodities to include technological processes required to make them useful. This is a deft and also an important expansion of reach from resource control to technological choke point management, effectively saying, look, this is going to create a choke point. And all of these policies that either the Trump administration wanted to do with AI, the Biden administration wanted to do, all of that's gone. You're spending $1 trillion on your military, or I think it was 900 billion or whatever that number is. Okay, how do you get the planes? How do you build the jets? How do you build the missiles? Hell, how do you build the EVs? How do you build just basic electronics when all of these things are now going to go through a Chinese choke point where they're being decided upon on a case-by-case basis? And it was something else that Warwick pointed out. He says, if it wasn't for AI, the US economy would have only grown by 0.1%. So we were effectively living off of the technology that China has now put a choke point on as we move forward into time. That's amazing. That is amazing. No, obviously this didn't come out the blue. But I sense that there's something else going on also, though. Like, meaning not just the tariffs, but China is putting this under the notion of national security and making the argument that, well, we also want to stop the proliferation of weapons across the globe. Is there more to it than that?
Well, a lot of people are making that argument. A lot of people, the Chinese government hasn't really officially made the argument that they're trying to reduce U.S. stockpiles of weapons or stop what's happening in Gaza, but that's implied in a lot of the work that they're doing. I did want to point out something really fast about Warwick Powell. I'm a friend of his.
Yeah.
And one of the things he wrote in his article that you're referring to is the U.S. can keep its dollars. China has the dysprosium. I don't know what that is, but it's a rare earth mineral. And I think it's
I love
really
the way
funny.
you put the stuff right. Yeah, dysprosium.
Because, the U.S. is selling U.S. dollars in order to buy gold and has been doing that since around 2013. So, the U.S. keeps weaponizing the dollar, using its sanctions, hurting countries around the world. It's Europe and the United States are stealing Russian money. So a lot of that is actually really interesting because that is scaring away huge investors like China, which in 2008 bought $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries. But when the United States, turned to China and said, you know what, we're going to try to contain you. And basically that came out of several administrations. And it's not either party. It seems to be both parties. And so China's like, okay, well, we'll slowly reduce our holdings of U.S. treasuries until now. China holds more gold than it does U.S. treasuries, which is a reverse from just last year. So, that is something that these are self-inflicted wounds. The way that the United States is attempting to deal with China is aggressive. They're framing China as an adversary when in my personal opinion, the United States, its best interest is to frame China as a peer. One of the things that was happening to the UK when it began to lose its hold on global power is it turned to the obvious successor and said, okay, US, we're going to be allies with you because, we want to basically stay relevant. I think if the United States wants to stay relevant in the emerging multipolar world, its best hope is to develop a closer diplomatic relationship, closer trade ties with China. And I think that Washington, D.C. for the last 4 administrations has really fumbled that and messed up. So I think China's not just attempting to stop U.S. proliferation, but it's saying that it can. That is essentially a threat to one of the things that the United States values, and that it's its military primacy, which, a lot of the rest of the world isn't very fond of. So if the United States wants to come back to the table and lower tariffs and go tit for tat back down to where it was before maybe 2016, it can do that. But one of the things that I think this administration, this Trump administration, the new one, is they really came out arrogantly and thought that they could really knock China down. You say if China is the one that knocks. China isn't trying to hurt the United States. China is trying to show the United States that it is capable of doing so that in future negotiations, the United States might come to its senses. Now, there is a rumor, and this rumor was started by the Wall Street Journal, that China has in fact offered the United States $1 trillion of investments in factories and other things to help the U.S. economy in exchange for basically, peace. And it has a list of kind of demands that it would like. And if the United States, if Trump wants a win, I swear this is the only way to go, is to basically take China up on its offer and put the China hawking to the side. I really think that is the best way to go for the United States.
Oh, that's hard. That's hard. Because what you're asking is a country that views itself as a hegemon. Still, I don't believe for a moment the U.S. has given up on this idea of a hegemon. That has spent the last, as you point out, like 3 or 4 administrations with the entire objective to be, we need to contain China. China is an issue. China is a threat. They pulled 800 billion people out of poverty, 800 million people out of poverty. This is an issue for us. We got to do something about it. Meaning Obama's entire policy for the whole Trans-Pacific Partnership was to cow China. And so it's like you have this momentum, not to mention this hubris that runs through this kind of thread of U.S. thinking. That is a hard ship to turn around. But to your point, 78% of U.S. I'm sorry, just one last point. 78% of U.S. military hardware requires components from China. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 78. How do I put this? 78%. There it is. Over 78% of military systems rely on materials sourced directly from China or indirectly from China. Maybe they should put it to the side. Give me your thoughts.
I completely agree. I think the United States' only choice, I actually would like to see the U.S. de-escalation of its military, of our military. I think it's overkill, and we can look at around U.S. infrastructure. We clearly need to be investing in the Republic, not in the Empire. But that's beside the point. If the United States wants to continue to be a viable economy, the only way forward is with Chinese companies. There's a Chinese company, and just as one example of many. There's a professor at Princeton, Kyle Chan, who tracks all of the Chinese JVs, joint ventures in the United States. But this is just one example of those. It's called Invenergy, and it's opened with a Chinese solar company and an American solar company, and it manufactures solar for the U.S. market and export with American workers on American soil, but it uses Chinese technology. That is the kind of win-win that the United States needs. The United States if we want to bring manufacturing back, firstly, it's very difficult because of the input problem and the cost of all of these, the cost of electricity, the cost of energy, water, all of these things. But if we do want to start bringing manufacturing back, we need Chinese technology. The CEO of Ford went to the BYD factory in China, and he said it was, quote, humbling. I mean, he said a lot of other things that basically go towards that. But if Ford or GM want to be successful, they should be doing JVs with BYD and China's Chery and working with Chinese companies using Chinese innovation, Chinese technology, and bringing that to U.S. consumers. Because, for example, BYD has a car that in US dollars costs $12,000. Could you imagine the glee of American consumers if they had a state-of-the-art EV that only costs $12,000? This is what is being denied us.
Yeah, I remember that. I saw the interview with that Ford guy, and he made the point of saying, which I think is somewhat kind of ludicrous, but maybe not. I understand where he was trying to get at, that the lack of competition has hampered the American market, that this being able to compete would have made better cars and forced them to be able to make better cars. But I think what he kind of misses, and I want your take on it, is maybe he can't compete. Like maybe the US looked at it and thought to themselves, there's no way these American automakers can compete with the products that are coming out of China. And so it would decimate our own domestic market. And so even though we may not be able to sell those cars abroad, at the very least, we can maintain our market and sell them here. Give me your thoughts on that, though. I mean, because I heard his comments and I was like, dude, I think they're trying to save you. You're missing it.
Well, I mean, honestly, the United States cannot compete in a lot of fields with China. And I think that a degree of protectionism is actually a good idea. And I think
Mhm.
China actually taught this lesson because as the IMF and World Bank were going around the world, insisting that poor countries opened up their markets to Western investments and
Yeah.
forced them to liberalize their economies and sell off their national assets, China said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're not going to do that. We'll take your loans and we'll pay them back, but we're not liberalizing our economy to the degree to which all these other countries did. And they have, in fact, protected certain industries. So I
Mhm.
think when the United States is looking, down the line, it's not always a great idea to just open the floodgates for everything that's going to come in. And I think the United States should to be taking cues from China. We talked about SOEs. I would love to see more utilities in the United States. But going back to rare earth minerals and the United States military, clearly you're making an excellent point. And I think this is a point that's missed by a lot of people because I see a lot of people with huge accounts, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers on various social media saying, oh, we'll just make our own rare earth minerals. An economist, I can't remember his name, last week suggested, an American economist, that it would
Yeah.
take 29 years to catch up with where China is now if we went all in and we started, investing in education and started subsidizing, and the military was part of that, and we just went completely berserk trying to catch up. But the United States is going to need more munitions next year. We don't have 29 years, which I think that means the U.S. is going to be forced to the table and there's going to be some kind of deal. As an American who lives in China, I hope it's $1 trillion investment from China in the United States, because that would mean continued peace, and I could safely enjoy my time without being concerned about the United States, concerned about what I'm doing over here. I would much rather that China and the U.S. had a peaceful relationship, and the Chinese people and the U.S. people were very similar. I mean, put aside all the politics and stuff, we're just people. We just want everyone just, somewhere in China right now, there's a grandfather holding his grandson's hand and they're walking home from school. And I'm sure the
Yep.
same thing is going to happen a million times in the United States tomorrow as well. Like, we're really just people and we need our governments to get along. There are things that the United States needs that China has. There are things that China needs that the United States has. And, Chinese people really love the United States. They love Marvel movies. They love, Dune 2. Dune 2 was huge here. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not like people in China hate the United States, but there does seem to be a few very critical people in the U.S. government who hate China, and I think that that's not healthy for the United States. A much healthier play for the United States moving forward is cooperation with China and integration economically and diplomatically.
Yeah, agreed. It is a very hard thing to get a hegemon to stop seeing itself as a hegemon. But there's an argument that is being made by some on Twitter. And he's effectively arguing, there's one particular person, he has a very big account. He gets a lot of pushback when he makes this argument, but I'm going to present this argument to get your take on it. That the United States does see China as a peer. That regardless of all the hyperbolic language, regardless of all of the threats and all this other stuff, that Donald Trump has to sell it. It's kind of like with the United States and Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. has no cards. Everything that the U.S. has been doing, maybe I'll give tomahawks. Maybe I'll give this. Maybe I'll give that. Let's go after the energy sector. All of these things are trying to get leverage. It's a lust for leverage that they don't have. If you had it, you would have used it and exerted it by now in order to try to compel the Russians. I'm saying the same thing is true for China in this case, that the U.S. may already see him as, let's say, a peer, but Trump, for reasons of media, for reasons of his own ego, would never say it. Like, meaning Trump would never say that he has to be on even keel with the Russians and Ukraine. In the same way that he can't bring himself to say that we're on an even keel with China in regards to these kind of peer nations. That it doesn't mean that we're not going to compete. It doesn't mean that he's going to be hyperbolic and all that stuff. But how do you see it? I mean, does China believe that the U.S. sees them as a peer, regardless of what the language comes out of the U.S.? Or you don't think it's that way? You think the U.S. is still in this mindset of we must destroy and hobble and prevent China from the horse getting out of the barn?
Well, there's a famous economist who is friends with Jeffrey Sachs, a friend of mine, and John Mearsheimer believes
It's
in,
fantastic.
like you mentioned, hegemony. He
Yes.
believes that the U.S. and Western conception of whoever gains power in this world wants to be a hegemon is the way that the world works.
Mitchum
And
is
when we
wrong.
look, yeah, I think he's wrong. I mean, and
Yeah.
actually, Jeff Sachs also thinks he's wrong. China does not want to be a hegemon. China wants to have wealthy people and do business and be open for business and trade with other countries and take care of itself and also grow its peers in the rest of the world. It doesn't have alliances with any country. But I think John Mearsheimer is a very intelligent man, but he's wrong about the way that people think in Asia and the way that they think in China specifically isn't that way. There were
Yeah.
a couple of centuries where China was the most powerful country in all of Asia, and it actually withdrew and basically closed its borders to the other countries. It was not interested in dominating Japan and Korea and Thailand. And those countries wanted to do trade with China, and China was like, we're too busy with our own stuff. So China doesn't actually have that mentality of wanting to rule the world. So I think that is a misconception. However, I'm going back to your point about Donald Trump. I think you're right to a degree, but we have to look at what's not the same in the way that China treats the United States and the way that the United States treats China. China has not surrounded the United States with like 50 military bases.
Exactly.
But the United States has. China does not fly sorties of spy planes up and down the coast of the United States. But the United States does that on a daily basis to China. China does not send its cruisers up the coast of the United States frequently, but the United States does. China does not arm Hawaii so that it can vie for independence, but the United States does arm Taiwan. So the United States is directly poking China in the eye all the time on all kinds of red line issues that really matter to the national security to the people of China, and China is not reciprocating that behavior. Yes, it's engaged in trade tit for tat, but it is not engaged in a military tit for tat. China has an enormous, very powerful military, but I assure you, it's really for national defense. China hasn't been in a war since 1979, 45 years ago, and it was in that war for 1 month. And the United States, as we know, and I'm sure most of your viewers know, is constantly at war. I think in our entire history, there have been 12 years of peace. I mean, the United States is the definition of an imperial actor who does obviously want hegemon, and China clearly, just from looking at the facts, is not. So I think, yeah, Trump, does say, he has, maybe there is some openness to peace. Maybe it's the art of the deal where he wants to go to Beijing and finally settle on a deal and find some way to coexist with China. But the way that the United States, not just Donald Trump, because the United States is not just the president, the way
Correct.
U.S. military behavior and the State Department treat China is adversarial.
It is. I mean, I am not one of those people that believe that the U.S. is giving up hegemony. I just don't buy it. I think you may drag that horse to water because they're forced. Like, meaning, if you and I have a similar chess rating, then I can't dominate you. Even though if we're playing blitz for like 20, 30 games, I'm damn sure going to try. It's kind of like that, right? The U.S. is just bumped into something that it just can't push past in the typical way that it does, but it's going to give the bluster and everything else. No, I agree with you entirely. The Wall Street Journal's piece, what do you say, a rumor? So let's call it a rumor. What did China want out of that? I'm curious.
I briefly looked over. One of the things that they wanted was to change the wording about the U.S. relationship with Taiwan, which was we recognize that Taiwan is part of China and that there is one China, which is the current wording. They want the United States to say we oppose independence for for Taiwan or Taiwan province. But it was it are things that China considers a red line. Now, you often hear from people who want to frame China as an aggressor that China is preparing for war and that China is preparing to take Taiwan back. And this is actually true to an extent. It is preparing for war and preparing to invade Taiwan in the event of US intervention or in the event of Japanese intervention. If a foreign power intervenes in the internal affairs of China, then China will react. But the plan right now is not military. That is a backup plan. The plan is to coax Taiwan people into realizing that the mainland's economy is more powerful, that they have a lot to gain from rejoining, I don't know what you would call it, Greater China. So that is the ideal. And I think that may actually be achievable in the next 5 to 10 years. I know some Chinese people who think it might theoretically happen faster than that. But the concept in the West where they frame China as an aggressor or as a hegemon by quoting Xi Jinping saying we need to prepare for war, that is one of those we need to prepare for war so we can assure peace kinds of we need to prepare for war.
Right. Well, it's wild. I mean, because you pointed out that our media is trash. Our media is trash. If you see, if somebody, let's say, slaps your wife and you get into a fight with that guy and they get you on camera and the media in the US reports, look at Jason Smith just beating a guy up for no reason. And people say, wow, that's amazing that he wilded out and just punched somebody like that. That's unfortunate. He shouldn't have been able to do that. Now, the moment that you pull back on it and say, well, the guy did slap his wife and say very bad things. He's responding to something. That's the way our media reports a lot of stuff. So they would say Kim Jong-un is firing missiles into the Sea of Japan, ignoring the fact that the US is pretending as if they're trying to invade North Korea in these kind of military exercises, meaning they leave that stuff out. So they leave out the fact that the US has military in Taiwan, that the US has been this kind of salami slicing, this idea of Taiwan independence and blowing off the communiques. They leave that part out, which is the only reason they could say, well, China may militarily attack Taiwan. And again, missing that the US has 800 military bases around the world. I've often asked this question, how does a country that plays Go deal with a country that plays chess? When you mention that part of the deal is, well, we need you to change the language in the communiques. And I'm like, are you serious? It's a communique. Like, we didn't care about the other one. Why would we care about a new language change? like China, do they get that? Because sometimes I don't think other countries around the world get that. When I see Iran, for example, and I think to myself, certainly you guys know we're sociopaths. What are you doing? And because they would try to make a deal, and then they get hit in the middle of trying to make the deal. Or the Hamas thing with Qatar, and they get hit in the middle of them trying to make a deal with Qatar. And I'm like, I don't think foreign countries fully get how psychopathic many of these world leaders are. It doesn't matter if we'll change the language. Do they really think that that's going to affect US policy regarding Taiwan?
Well, I think they're hopeful. I think there's an enormous amount of hope that there can be rational thinking in Washington, D.C. And going back to your point from earlier about rare earth minerals in the United States and munitions, maybe I think if anything can bring the United States to its senses, it's something like that. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the United States' ability to just replace China's complete supply chain overnight. It's not going to happen. So I really think that this is going to be one of those things that forces Donald Trump and Marco Rubio to come to the table with some kind of meaningful plan. And that's going to hopefully keep the peace, at least for now, at least for a generation. I'm hoping, really, because if some kind of deal can be made where the United States feels that it's able to continue, because semiconductors are made with rare earth materials. So if other countries can't get rare earth materials from China, then they can't make smartphones outside of China anymore. I mean, that's insane. So I think the United States will be forced to sit down and make some kind of deal. The next year is going to be very interesting because the United States needs China. And China has already proven that it doesn't actually need the United States as much. Exports only account for 12% of China's economy. And
That's like one city, I heard.
yeah, and the United States comprises an actual minority of that because ASEAN, which is the Southeast Asian nations, they actually are the primary trade partner with China. And China has increased, as we've talked about before, exports to countries around the world, including Africa, South America, Europe, Middle East, because of the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's basically replaced the United States consumption of Chinese products to an equal degree to which the United States was consuming those. And China's economy is going to grow at least by 4.8%, according to the World Bank, a report that came out very recently. And that actually they upgraded from 4%. I'm still optimistic China's economy GDP growth will be 5%, which is what China wanted before the trade war happened. That was their goal. And then the trade war happened. China's going to still make its goal, but the United States is floundering. And there's a lot of things that the United States needs from China. And China has already kind of proven that the tariffs didn't affect it nearly as much as the United States is clearly affected by and will be affected by. I was talking to an economist really fast, Dr. Yan Liang from Willamette University in Oregon this morning in Beijing. I guess it was last night for her. And she was explaining that the U.S. GDP is barely growing, and like just like you mentioned, without AI, and that China's ability to grow its economy at roughly the same goal that it was setting is basically proven that China, while it wants to do trade with the United States, China absolutely wants to trade with the United States. It doesn't need trade with the United States.
Mm-hmm. I think people need to realize this is a checkmate. And what I mean by this is, part of the U.S. strategy was we need to keep China in the barn. So there's that. Well, that horse is out the barn. The other part of it, for China's standpoint, was we need time. That if we can have enough time, and give me your take on this, because I could be wrong. If we have enough time, then just the very scale of our economy, the scale of our industrial sector, the U.S. cannot compete in that sense. Meaning, you're not going to challenge us militarily when it becomes clear that you would just obviously lose. And if we have 5 years, 10 years, then the ability for us to build ships, boats, bombs, missiles, etc., makes it that much more clear in that sense. Well, any deal that the United States strikes with China, especially with the constraints and the choke points that have been enacted just in this provision by itself, easily gives China that time frame if they want that time horizon. The U.S., as you point out, can't build the stuff. They don't have the refineries. May be able to get from Europe, but it will take Europe a decade or more for them to even build up their capabilities to doing this, meaning the time that China wanted, it has. Am I thinking about this right? Or tell me if I'm getting this wrong.
I think you're completely right. I think China has played the long game. There used to be a phrase, I think it came from Deng Xiaoping, that basically, if you were to hide our power and lay low. And I think that it did that for a very long time, for 40 years. And it was only in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years that China has really said, you know what, we're actually really powerful. And now the world is just starting to notice in the last couple of years, really. I mean, besides statesmen and people who have been studying China, the people of the world are really starting to look at Chinese infrastructure and say, wow, we don't have that. I mean, just look at the new Canyon Bridge in Guizhou. It's the tallest bridge in the world. I mean, the United States used to be the one building the biggest, the tallest, and the most amazing infrastructure in the world. And now China is opening a new amazing piece of infrastructure almost every single day, just because China's population is so large and they can actually absorb that kind of infrastructure, and the people need and use it. And it's, in a lot of cases, it's actually transferring wealth from urban areas to rural areas. There's so many things, textured and layered things that they're doing by each one of these projects. That bridge does not just serve as a bridge and a new highway. It is actually attracting wealth to a very poor part of China. So they're building up their, local wealth from urban people like myself who are absolutely going to go visit that bridge in their lifetime. It's just like the Golden Gate to some extent. I mean, a lot of people go to San Francisco just to see that. And that is an amazing way that San Francisco has increased its wealth over the years. I mean, it's an amazingly beautiful city. But I mean, China builds infrastructure and little villages to do that, to create wealth where it wasn't before. China is so well planned. And I think this is something the United States really misses. The United States is like, oh, let's have the invisible hand do everything, right? Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but China is actually making 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans that go as far as I know, 2049 is one of the plans that they have. And so all these plans within plans that are passed up and down the government, low levels, little villages, big cities. So the United States wants to say, haha, we're going to put a bunch of tariffs on you because you need us to import your goods. China is going to turn around and just make a plan to get around that. And it's going to follow that plan until that plan succeeds.
There was a question about, the gentleman, Mina Uncensored. China has such a hands-off policy to a lot of stuff that takes place in a foreign policy sense that, like, for example, the many of these little fires that seems to be taking place around China, for example. So India and Pakistan gets into it. Nepal has a quote unquote revolution, if you want to call it that. Cambodia and Indonesia get into, was it Indonesia? I think it was Indonesia. Cambodia and Indonesia get into a fight. Like, oh no, sorry.
Cambodia and Thailand.
Thailand, right.
Yeah.
I'm in Indonesia. This seems very coincidental, especially considering that China's strategy of dealing with, let's say, choke points in regards to the ocean, because that was part of the US strategy also. Well, we can create choke points in various parts of the globe for China's. They need to get their goods from point A to point B over the ocean. If we can find certain areas where we can create choke points, we can choke off Chinese industry, et cetera. And China says, okay, well, let's do the Belt and Road. Let's do the stuff over land. Let's make this railroad to Iran. And then it seems like the counterstroke to that is effectively a huge amount of money coming out of like USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, all of these NGOs that just so happen to create fires in the areas that China would need to be able to send their goods through. Do you see it in those terms? Like, do you think it's more of a coincidence that these places are going up in flames, or do you think it's more of a playbook being played?
You and I are of the same mind. I completely agree. I actually wrote newspaper articles for Nepal News about Belt and Road projects that they were building and how China wanted to connect to Nepal. And actually, China's goal is not just to connect to Nepal, but to connect India to Nepal as well. So China's already building the infrastructure on its side, and it's already given money, in some cases free, some grants, to build roads for Nepal to be better connected to China. So when Nepal went down, there were a lot of people debating what happened online. It got really heated between a lot of really big friends in the China community. But I am definitely 100,000% with Brian Berlitic and Nari Vitachi, the journalist in Hong Kong, on this. It is very clear that the United States makes a declaration that we're going to back away from Asia and focus on our domestic issues. And watching ICE in the United States, it kind of looks like the United States is going to war with itself. But at the same time, nothing changed. I think, in fact, the whole we're shutting down USAID thing was just cover for them to reorganize how the State Department was interfering in the foreign affairs of other countries, because noted NED people are now in the government in Nepal and other countries around China. Fortunately, what you're talking about, Nepal was going to be a new project to connect India and China and connect Nepal through land ports to China to increase the wealth of Nepalese people. And so it's bad for them. I feel sorry for them. However, the connection that China has with most of the rest of the world island runs through Kazakhstan. So that's safe, at least for now. So I would be watching Kazakhstan if I was a betting man, because that is the way that China is connected to the rest of the world, really. In case the United States were to shut off its ability to ship over sea around Singapore and so forth. But absolutely, it looks like the United States is going cutthroat to try to contain China with pro-US governments around China that are set up to be operated covertly out of Washington, D.C. And I think that a lot of research that has gone into that. And I think Brian Berletic is doing incredible work. For anyone who wants to know more about it, they should look into him, because he's covered it, and Nuri Vitachi too, really in a lot of depth. It's scary. It's actually kind of frightening how much the United States is obsessing with China by going after China's neighbors.
That's kind of my point about any kind of deal with the U.S. Like that's precisely my point. Like, how does China deal with that? Like, because I see it's making counter move from the standpoint of, okay, because it's always weird to me, right? People write policy papers, and it's not like these are hidden secret documents. These documents are there for anybody to read. So you could be in China and be like, all right, well, they're doing this, this, and this. How do we counter that? And obviously there are going to be some secret stuff, but for all intents and purposes, we are following a playbook of trying to maintain primacy, and at the very least to try to make life miserable for China and its neighbors as it pursues its objectives of its own growth and stability. How does China deal with that? I mean, is it just from its point of view, well, we just continue to grow, we continue to make friends with these places, we continue to trade, or does it take, I don't know, some other action in this regard? Because it seems to be very restrained, very benign in the way that it engages.
You're absolutely right. I actually kind of find it frustrating sometimes, but I have to sit back and try to accept the fact that I'm a guest in China and that I'm not going to be going and like saying, you know what, you guys should be doing something. But
Right.
you know what really happens is China has this policy, a very firm policy of non-intervention in the affairs of foreign countries. And it takes that so seriously that it's to the point that it's frustrating, because China is like, oh, you have a new government, we'll trade with the new government. And this goes back to something Carl Cha, I think you may have had him on before, has said, and that is, China is open for business. So if you have a new government, great, let's trade. And so, we see this in Israeli Gaza. We see this because China has condemned Israel again and again and again and votes against everything that Israel's doing. But at the same time, China and Israel are still trading. And China is also sending aid to Gaza at the same time, because China does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. And so this is really frustrating for a lot of people. And you look at Nepal, as soon as the new government came in, China's government was like, we're eager to engage with the new government and open diplomatic relations on a peer-to-peer basis. And this, I think it's actually the bold move. China understands that it's playing the long game, that it is demonstrating peace. It's not just saying we are for peace. It's actually showing what peace looks like, because it is not like the United States sanctioning countries all over the world. It doesn't do that. It does sanction individuals for various reasons, but not whole states. And it doesn't engage militarily with states. And even sometimes when it runs counter to the benefit of China, instead it says, oh, you have a new government, we're open for business, let's engage in diplomatic ties. I mean, it's like that pacifist friend of ours that we would ask, oh, well, what if you do if someone hits you? And in China's case, it would only come to blows if someone actually hit China directly. So, I think, I don't think the United States should be very careful, because there is a red line. And if the United States were to actually militarily engage with China in some way, there would be a retaliation. But as long as it's going on in these covert ways in other nations, I think China, for the most part, is just going to say, welcome to the new government. We're open for business. Do you want to trade? We're going to send our ambassador when you're ready.
But isn't that potato? I mean, what I mean by that is the limits on graphene, lithium, rare earths, etc. China may not say it directly, but everybody and their mama knows that part of the reason they're doing that is to put a constraint on the U.S.'s capability to wage war against China. Or at the very least, but isn't that a sanction by another term, or at the very least not a tariff, but a sanction by another term? We're creating choke points in the way that you're able to operate. I'm not saying it's negative. I would agree. In fact, I would probably go further if I was trying. but that's besides the point. I'm not saying to disagree. I'm pointing out that they do engage in it, even if they call it something else.
Mm.
And
well, I meant, what I primarily meant was not militarily or in
okay,
a covert way to overthrow a government, for example.
okay. And I
But
wouldn't
you're
want
right.
them to. They would lose
Yeah.
credibility if they even did try
Yeah.
to do something like that. Agreed. Yeah, I guess my concern is that you get a situation where governments flip. And those, like for example, Argentina, really good example. Milei gets into Argentina. Argentina was supposed to be a member of BRICS. They immediately pull out of any notion of BRICS. Now China may stand like Jesus, waiting for people to come back. And when Milei gets out, Argentina may go back to BRICS. And so in your case, your point being the long term would play out in that. But I guess my thought is trade is possible when countries are not at war and not at conflict. And if sometimes chaos is the entire point of the process, like for example, in Nepal, does Nepal still, I can't get it out. Will they still go through with the Belt and Road Initiative with the new government that's in play?
Well, currently they're a member of the Belt and Road Initiative. However, Nepal has paused some of the projects. In fact, it has paused some of the projects, but a lot of the projects that have been built are there, and they're going to continue to help Nepal anyway. I think part of China's thinking is, if you look at the underdeveloped world, it has been underdeveloped. It didn't just start that way. At some point, Europe was relatively underdeveloped and Africa was relatively underdeveloped. And then Europe came and took wealth from Africa and India and elsewhere and became developed. And then these other places became poorer. I mean, it's obvious because there was a transfer of wealth and it was at the point of a bayonet and sword.
Yes.
And so Europe took all of that wealth. I think China sees that by developing the underdeveloped world, it is creating the conditions for a more peaceful world, and it is playing a bigger long game than the United States is really understanding or really seeing. China wants to rebuild the world in a new way where it is not possible for some countries to take advantage of others because there's a degree of economic autonomy. Look at solar exports, for example. The Treasury Secretary of the United States, the former Yellen, basically was screaming over capacity for the last couple of months before she was removed from her role. And it's not just that China wants to build the most amazing energy infrastructure domestically that is possible. No, there's another play here. China is trying to help the underdeveloped world develop energy autonomy so it is no longer reliant on fossil fuel imports, not just to help the environment, but to take power away from countries that benefit from such an arrangement, if you understand what I mean.
Yes. Yes, I do understand what you mean by that. Basically, in helping, let's say, the underdeveloped world develop, you are allowing them more autonomy. A, you're making friends, so there's that, right? They usually appreciate if you build a hospital in their country. But B, you're allowing them to be more autonomous, so there's less control that can be exerted by other countries in those countries. No, I do get it. I do get it. As you point out, it's a long game, as opposed to this just kind of direct action in the way that the U.S. does. Also, and I guess to speak to the last point, there's another argument that's being made also implicitly by China in this. Basically, we believe in a global world. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in sovereignty of nations. Like, that is an argument that seems to come out of their behavior throughout the world. So, no, well, we're not going to intervene militarily in this country because the country has a sovereign right to exist. Even if we know that somebody else is pushing and creating issues, we are not going to engage. We're not going to get involved. We believe in rule of law. We believe in sovereignty. What do these other people that are overthrowing the government, what do they believe in? It's almost like a sales pitch to the rest of the world on some level.
I would like to add one thing because I think my answer was incomplete now that I'm hearing you articulate it back so eloquently. China also does believe in the rule of law of the United Nations and the Security Council. Right. That's why it abides by the all of the vetoes of the United States, sadly. But another aspect of that is that China does participate in peacekeeping missions, which are often put in sovereign nations against those nations' will. So China is willing to engage with the United Nations in peacekeeping missions so long as the law of the United Nations is followed to the letter of the law. But again, those forces, as we both know, don't actually engage in combat unless they are
Right.
directly fired on. So they're mostly, no offense to those people who work so hard to try to create peace, not really particularly useful.
Yeah. No, and that's a fair distinction. I mean, I was thinking more unilateral going into a country.
Right.
No, that argument is a damn good argument. I mean, in the old days, the U.S. could make this argument that we are freedom, democracy. You should come with us as opposed to the Soviet Union. And these days, that argument has just been tossed. This is just naked hegemony at this point. Jason, fantastic breakdown, man. Really good breakdown.
Thank you, sir.
I really appreciate you joining me on this. I really appreciate you explaining this. Great work. Absolutely great work. Jason Smith, he's a journalist, author, radio show host, podcaster, and media commentator. His latest book is entitled The World Without Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future. By the way, where can people find you, just so people would know?
It's on Amazon. So you just search in Amazon using the name that you just gave, and the book will pop right up.
But you have a podcast, a YouTube show, and a radio show.
Yeah, I have a couple of radio shows now. I've just given some extra work today.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, fair enough. Where can people find you on YouTube?
The Bridge to China is the name of the show. I think that's also the handle now. I think we were able to successfully change it. You can find us on podcast, Spotify, Apple China, Apple USA, and basically any podcasting platform, whatever you guys like. We're on there, The Bridge to China. We produce at least 2 episodes every single week. If you're in some countries, Laos, Cambodia, Pakistan, Beijing, you can find us on the air.
Badass, man. Badass. Congratulations on the new radio show, by the way.
Thank you.
Jason, you have a really good night. Thank you for this.
You too, sir.
Bye-bye. All right. Great breakdown with Jason. Fantastic breakdown. And we're going to go from one good guest to another damn good guest. We're joined with Arnaud Develay. How you doing, Arnaud? You doing okay today?
Hello, Jamal. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Good. Arnaud, he's an author, political analyst, international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. Definitely check it out. Arnaud, there are a few things that I want to hit with you, but the first one has to do with the energy wars that seem to have been taking place, where if you were on social media, there were a lot of people who were screaming, oh my God, Ukraine is winning. They're taking out Russia's energy grid. And this comes out in Bloomberg today to get across how far from the truth that was, especially when Russia seemed to up their game in regards to hitting their own infrastructure. I mean, hitting Ukraine's infrastructure. 60% of Ukraine's capability of producing gas is destroyed, just gone, completely obliterated. And I guess, I used to make this argument that part of what Russia is doing, the reason that this is quote unquote taking so long in the way that people will talk about, isn't weakness. It's because Russia recognizes that there could be a future war with Europe and that these things are done on some level to damage Europe before they even get to that point. Because who is going to supply the gas and energy to Ukraine if not for Europe? Give me your take on this. Give me your thoughts.
Well, some economist, liberal economist, a neoliberal economist, French one, his name is Charles Gave, used to define energy as the capability to power an economy. So I guess by extension, without energy, it makes it even more difficult to wage war. Hence your allusion to Europe being preemptively deprived of the means to wage any kind of military adventurism against Russia. So Russia is trying to, of course, first and foremost, dismantle Ukraine's capabilities to continue waging war, essentially dismantling their infrastructure, the ability to deploy troops, blowing up bridges, blowing up, any kind of nodes. But also, and you're right to underline it, yes, making sure that, well, they have no light, they have no power, they have nothing to power those armament systems. So it's it seems kind of painstakingly slow, but it's methodical. It does the job. It's not a flash in the pan like you would have it per Hollywood standards, but Russia has never followed the script as far as Hollywood standards is concerned. It seems somewhat dull, but over time it's very efficient. So, to make a long story short, it makes perfect sense in what they're trying to accomplish. Keeping in mind again that the idea is to try to limit the loss of life. So again, this is the prime directive because you have to live with those people. They live next door. Whoever is going to be left within this, it's out of the country now. And so you want to make sure that you focus your attention on the means, the delivery, means of delivery, the means themselves in terms of power infrastructure, power grids. And why not? Why not? If you're lucky, maybe try to get substantial amount of the population to feel like that's it. They're fed up to live in such conditions. You might be able to recruit people, and have them turn against their leaders. And I say leaders, quote unquote, of course. They're anything but elites.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess my thought is, but that seems to also be applying for Europe. Like if you look at the German economy, for example, the German economy is tanking. I mean, they're losing hundreds of thousands of jobs. They're in a recession for like the third term. I believe they're going into the third year where they're back into another recession. If you look at France, France is utterly and entirely collapsed. Just fundamentally collapsed. The guy lasted 14 hours as prime minister. And now there's a question of, okay, well, is Macron going to stay? He's saying that he is. If you bring up another government and that government collapses, at that point, you're going to have another election cycle. And of course, the National Rally is most likely going to win that election cycle this time around. I mean, you can look all through Europe and they're going into this kind of debt crisis while simultaneously trying to supply Ukraine with energy, money, weapons, etc. It seems like this is not just hitting Ukraine, it's also hitting Europe.
Yeah, it's all connected. You're right. It's almost like a matryoshka, Russian dolls. One fits into the other. And so, yes. So the analysis one can make about Ukraine, to the extent it is the proxy per se, extends to Europe as well, because Europe is a proxy of Washington. And so to the extent Europe is coerced into buying American wares, this gives time and political cover to the establishment in DC, trying to somewhat extract victory out of the jaws of defeat, one could say, in a way, at least in as far as perception management is concerned.
Yeah.
But obviously, as one of my law professors used to say when we were going through the Recipsa Loquitur tort classes, shit happens, and sometimes you got to take one for the team. And so I guess Europe is going to have to take one for the team. Problem is, they banked so much politically on this Ukraine project to the exclusion of economic, viability. I'm not even saying prosperity, but viability.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. France is on the verge of being basically placed under the care of the Frankfurt bankers, if not the IMF per se.
IMF. Yep.
And so right now, the idea is, they're trying to, why are they running out of prime ministers? Because every time a cabinet is formed, the main item on the agenda is to have a budget, which is dictated by Brussels and Frankfurt, to be adopted. And this requires fleecing the French taxpayer at the tune of $40 billion per year. But at the same time, you've given $54 billion to Zelensky. And you haven't even consulted with Parliament or anything like this. So the French people are like, whoa, what's going on here? This just doesn't compute. It doesn't, even the less sophisticated of them, they're less concerned about following up with what's going on. they can feel that something is drastically, amiss here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're right. But they have no choice. They have to maintain that trope. They have to maintain this discourse. I'm talking about politicians, Macron, chiefly among them. But we have to understand at the same time that Macron is surfing on chaos, because his job is not to be defending French interests. His job is to, if anything, accelerate French national demise, so that the construct per se is absorbed into a supra-federal European state, of which he fancies himself to be the first de facto, or at some point down the road, European emperor, which is why Putin actually makes fun of him, compares him to Napoleon, but quickly prompting to say, at least Napoleon won a few battles. He was known as a master tactician, even if he miscalculated on the ability to rally the Tsar to the continental blocus embargo blockade against the UK. But Macron is anything but that. Macron is lives in his own fantasy world. You mentioned Germany. Germany, yeah, I think the numbers are awful. We're talking about over the last 3 years, it's about 25% of its industrial base that's gone, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And and you have BlackRock Mertz, who's not unlike Macron, who's a Rothschild baby, is being endorsed by the oligarchy there, and to do a certain job. And that job is to basically, pursue the Ukraine project, which brings us to what we were slated to discuss today, which is what's going on with this alleged peace momentum between Washington and Moscow.
Well, that's what I was going to get. Just one last point on this. The reason why I went this route is because Gilbert Doctorow, who actually usually made a point of saying, that he thought that Putin was weak in his response to the whole Tomahawk missile stuff. And going to this, I guess, moving into the conversation where his response was effectively, look, the relationship between us would basically be over with if you're supplying them with Tomahawks. I think Tomahawks are a bluff, but whatever. I guess my point is the two main political entities in Europe, France and Germany, both are going through political chaos. France could legitimately lose in regard to its war party. And if you get the national rally, they're going to be far more skeptical of the war. Just like the Czech election, Babis, skeptical of the war, effectively saying he's not going to arm Ukraine going further. And if the AfD ends up taking power in Germany because of the policies for Germany, what does that mean for the capacity of Europe to maintain this war footing that they seem to be on? I guess I'm saying that the logic that seems to be going through Russia seems to be right in regards to what's affecting and what's taking place in Europe, that it may damage Europe's capability politically of continuing on this war footing. That was the point that I was trying to make. That was the reason why I went that route with it. But
sure.
But yeah, you're right. Is there a relationship now, or is there any relationship between Russia and the United States in regards to peace talks? Because they seem to be over with at this point.
Well, to say the least, the momentum generated by the Alaska summit has all but evaporated, and there were somewhat a few statements made at the senior level, one from Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Ryabkov, who somewhat alluded to, the window closing, I'm somewhat paraphrasing what he said, but at some point he's saying, you've got to, if you want to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. I mean, we're willing to be patient, but you've been in charge for 10 months now. We've had a slew of meetings. You've sent your special envoys. We've met on the sidelines of a lot of fora, but so far we haven't even moved forward on some of the most minute issues bearing on reestablishing diplomatic interoperability. Even direct flights, which at some point have been mentioned, never materialized. Right. So I don't know. It's and then at the same time, as you mentioned, we have those kind of inflammatory statements bearing on the shipping of Tomahawks missiles. So it's with all due respect, with Dr. Doctorow, fact is, I mean the term weak it's not very academic. I wouldn't say that
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin is weak. Putin is if anything a very nuanced person who takes into account a lot of factors and does not just kind of like fly the handle. That's not his own. That's never been his style.
Right.
So he's somewhat, he does what Macron should be doing. He levitates above the factions and he arbitrates. But one thing seems to be, there's a trend, I would say, on the Russian side, which somewhat would tend to say that there's growing impatience with, the way the Americans seemingly are stringing the Russians out on a lot of things. And so it's important in that sense to underline what happened on Vladimir Putin's birthday, as he was in Leningrad. He was very
Yes.
low key. My business is Russia, and I ain't got no days off. That's basically the idea. But he had dinner with not with guests, but with his general staff. So he
Yes.
was appraised of the situation. Things were reinforced on the fact that throughout the front, across the front, the Russian armed forces are steadily grinding their way westward. That procurement is on schedule, if not ahead of time. But the idea was, there was a consensus up until I would say recently, which bore on, we're going to somehow vehiculate the idea that we are content with the 4 new regions and we have no intent to move forward, except maybe to get a
Buffer.
buffer zone. Yes. Now it would seem that the pressure is increasing on the top executive to actually allow the Russian armed forces to grab more territories. So this is this is the trend where that we are seeing developing now at the highest level in Russia. It's not said openly, explicitly, but there are little tidbits being vehiculated at key nodes of the executive branch, whether it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ryabkov is not a nobody. He's someone who's touted as the potential successor to Lavrov,
Right.
When Lavrov decides to call it quits. And obviously, you have a lot of people within the entourage of the president who are, also feeling that enough is enough. I mean, some would say, yeah, Medvedev, and Medvedev is more like a kind of, well, not just Medvedev. There are other people as well who, espouse this kind of like, we don't have to appease Trump, because Trump, in some of those elements, as far as their perception of Trump is concerned, that Trump is actually not the bill of good that we were sold. The guy is weak. He's
Yeah.
first, he's not informed. He does not work his his files. He's somewhat of a dilettante, and he's someone who can be easily swayed. And so, how much patience should we express toward this psychological profile? Is he a viable partner? Because up to now, yeah, the idea has been, okay, he's a blowhard. One day he says something, the next he says the opposite. Ultimately, he talks about tomahawks, but then somebody, we can assume somebody in his entourage tells him it's not as simple, Mr. President. There's a few logistical aspect involved with the use of tomahawks, which would basically get us directly involved. And the Russians are perfectly aware of that, and they indirectly remind us that this would technically means, we are not just from a degree of separation, we are directly, allowing strikes deep into Russian territories. So I think we are approaching somewhat of a crest now, and some hard decisions are going to have to be taken. Because, on the ground, I mean, as far as the situation, factually speaking, is concerned, and you got to go with facts at some point. You can't just, I mean, you can, hope springs eternal. I can conceive that. But, there are other parameters to take into consideration. And if, it takes 2 to tango, if you feel like, you have no partner to do so,
Yeah.
you got to do what you got to do.
So there is
So we'll
pressure
see.
on Putin to push further and harder,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
to
Yes.
abandon this idea of maybe not necessarily abandon diplomacy. Obviously, Putin is a politician.
Of course not.
All things being equal, he would be open to it. But to kind of accept, I'm not going to get a partner in this. Like a U.S. president can't make the agreements that will be necessary for us to end the war. So we need to continue on in regards to what we're doing.
Well, if anything, in as far as like peripheral subjects and topics that were discussed during those summits and those meetings in Riyadh and Alaska, we can assume, we haven't seen any progress whatsoever, at all. And it seems like wherever we get a little bit of momentum, some say, well, the Europeans, the neocons within the administration, we're hearing Witkoff is on his way out by the end of the year. It's a very taxing job, special envoy, he's had his share, I guess, dealing with everything. 1 year of Washington. Yeah. So he just wants to go back to what he was doing because he's like, that's it, So in the end, we're back where we started, a weak president and undecisive, hesitant, quickly pressured. Obviously he's got, he's sitting on a volcano on a domestic level. So, and they can activate that at any moment. They have a lot of levers on him. He's not this kind of alpha male that we were presented, far from it. And so he'll go wherever the wind tells him to go. That's the problem. You cannot conduct policy by not having, a clear idea of where you're going. And the Russians, they always said so. If anything, they preferred someone like Biden because at least things were clear with Biden.
Mm-hmm.
With Trump, it's wishy-washy. Yeah.
Biden or Harris is that they were going to end up in a third world war.
It's the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Biden was actually a vegetable, so you were actually dealing with the Blinken administration, which is brings in a lot of family grievances and vendetta going back a century or so. So that's even that adds a layer to it,
Yeah.
But those people are still there, to be sure. And Trump or no Trump, presidents come and go, and those people remain. They're federal employees, and they just are so ensconced into the federal bureaucracy, and they've got relays and everywhere in the media, in the think tank business sector, so and Wall Street as well. So it's complicated.
Yeah, he's surrounded.
And the guy's gonna be gone after now 3 years. It's almost a year. I mean, he was elected in he didn't take office until January, but it's already almost been a year. So that's it. So now next year is all going to be about the midterms. You gotta position yourself for. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, the reason I say maybe is because Donald Trump seems to be fashioning himself to be a king, and putting the military on domestic soil is.
All right, don't get me started on this. This is, of course. I mean, you could go on forever, for hours, for sure, about the way this administration, this term is shaping up to be. It's very disappointing, even to the MAGA-est person. It's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
This is not what we were promised. I mean, the base is split, man. Your base, you managed to split your base. Bravo.
And he doesn't care, by the way, because as you point out, he's out in 3 years. That's assuming he doesn't
He's out.
King, or he doesn't die in office or something like that. No, I don't think he cares all that much. I mean, yeah, he's going to have to deal with the midterms, but I we'll see. I mean, if you were putting military on home soil, something that is supposed to be illegal, by the way, but if you're doing that,
1878 Posse Comitatus Act, yes, it's a big bar, yeah.
He seems to be.
I mean, a few presidents were tempted to do it, but they never, crossed that final Rubicon because it's it's such a stigma, yeah.
Yeah, especially.
But hey, those are imperial policy, they always come home to roost. Imperial policies always come back to the core.
Yeah.
This has been a lesson throughout history, and obviously, an unheeded lesson, as it were. But this is what we're saying now. And with the special layers that, a lot of the military and law enforcement personnel also get, training and externship in our strong allies in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
So they come back and then they can,
Israel, yes. Yes,
they can play the part, as far as, suppressing dissent. Is concerned. So
Let me ask you this:
not good.
is Odessa included into Russia's plans? There was a map where, let's call it Greater Russia, that was conspicuously on a board that people saw, and Odessa was part of it. Now, I always thought that Odessa had to be part of this deal. Like,
Are you talking about the map in the Oval Office?
well, that
There was a map in the Oval Office when Zelensky was there, but I guess you're talking about a different location, right?
I was talking about a different map, but Odessa was included as Russian territory. And to me, it's like,
Well, Odessa has always been Russian historical land. Odessa was founded under Catherine II. So, yeah, it's Russian land. Yes.
Agreed.
I'm anticipating your question, but yes.
Right. So, yes, it was always considered to be Russian land. An atrocity took place there by the Ukrainians, the one that got popped by the dad. I was having a conversation at the radio station about 2 years ago before we got fired. And I pointed out, I was like, Odessa has to be part of the military campaign. How do you not bring the Russian land back into it, considering what took place? And they were like, yeah, but how would they make that work? How would that happen, etc.? Is Odessa part of this? I mean, if you're going to end this war, and let's say you don't take all of Ukraine, do you at least protect the Black Sea by getting rid of Ukraine's ability to operate on the Black Sea by taking Odessa?
Well, I would answer your question by shifting it around and referring to what happened, a mere 2 weeks ago in Moldova. If Moldova was such, an important pawn on the chessboard, to the extent they outright stole the election for Maya Sandu, it's that, there are plans basically to make a move, probably on Transnistria, try to create a provocation there. And from that point on, things could escalate really quickly. Because I guess the French are going to try to make a dash for Odessa. Actually, it's interesting, historically speaking, as an aside, while Catherine II founded Odessa, the city itself was built by French architects and engineers.
Interesting.
So there we go. We're seeing this, those two elements again, just somehow being coming to a showdown in Odessa, which is, and as you said, access to the Black Sea. I guess the sole colonial project. If you lose access to the Black Sea altogether, that's pretty much it. So I'm pretty darn sure something is being prepared about Odessa, Transnistria. And if Transnistria, which is somewhat of a unresolved geopolitical offshoot of the Cold War, there's a huge cache of weapon there, huge depot, which is guarded by, there are Russian troops there. So obviously, if they want to accaparate Transnistria and everything that's in it, probably to arm Zelensky, provide him the weapons that he needs. If anything, I mean, at this point where we are now, they are starting, stealing Russian money, the frozen funds. So I don't believe those people have any limits. They will prod and poke and try to see how they can open that second front. Georgia last week was yet another instance on the heels of Moldova. They are desperate. And don't forget the South Caucasus, obviously, which is, the kettle, it's on the stove right now. So it's all in place. They're not giving up. They're not giving up. And I think, yes, Odessa might not be something that is pursued on the Russian initiative, but they might be obligated to react to something emanating from Moldova and by extension Transnistria, which is right next door to Ukraine at the level of Odessa. So they will want to, extend probably, operations in that sector, take the city, and send troops into Transnistria to protect their assets there. At least my understanding is that they're going to be lured into this, so the NATO side can get
to respond.
Yeah, because NATO always functions like this, from provocations to provocations, using false flags. Of course, the media, to whip people into a frenzy. And ultimately, when that failed, they create, a factual predicate on the ground, which the other side cannot just, allow to unravel without reacting.
Yes.
So right now we could say yes. I mean, yep, the Dnipropetrovsk region, Kharkov region, Nikolaev region, yes, those are also historic Russian lands. Odessa might have been actually a card left available for negotiation, i.e., I could sweeten the deal for you guys so that you keep an access to the sea. Just surrender to us all the perpetrators of the massacre of 2014. Let's clean up all the extremists, who are more or less running Odessa at the local level. But once this is done, we can come to some kind of understanding.
Hmm.
That card might be sacrificed on the altar of escalation at some point. Again,
But
because they have no choice as far as the Europeans are concerned.
yeah, but it doesn't seem like there's any negotiations taking place at all. Like that, this is
No,
going
of
to,
course not.
like,
No, no,
we're trying
no.
to make
But I was
anything
thinking, about 18 months ago, this actually was an element of language.
potential.
Oh, yeah, Odessa. Yeah, there's no rush. At some point, it could be a negotiating card, negotiating tool. But from what we've seen, with the Romanian, Georgescu being taken out, I
Hmm.
mean, no, they're just, there's no room for dissent. They're not even trying, to pretend that they are defending democracy. It's difficult to imagine any kind of creative way to resolve this confrontation, in a civilized fashion. I think Europe has gone completely overboard. You were saying the National Rally might come to power in France. I doubt it. I don't
You
think
don't think so? Oh, there's so many.
Brussels won't allow it, and the AfD they won't be allowed to triumph in Germany, no matter what, because the oligarchical supra-federal establishments and those transnational group slash interest, they are so far into what they're trying to accomplish that they cannot remotely take a chance on a party that once upon a time they might have cleaned up their act, semantically speaking, since then.
Mhm.
But once upon a time advocated for national sovereignty. That's not a risk they're willing to take. So AfD, they will use the Basic Law of 1948, and they will outlaw the party on some flimsy pretext that it's an extremist party which threatens German democracy. And as far as the National Rally in France, they will build this, what they call the Front Républicain around it. They will make natural alliances like they did a year ago to prevent it from placing one of theirs as prime minister.
Oh
Because
no, I
Macron
don't.
won't resign. He won't resign.
I don't often do this. And every time I have done this, I've won this bet. I am willing to bet money that you're wrong on this one.
Yeah, we'll
Like,
see.
the reason why I say that, and maybe I'm going to lose my shirt on this. Look, I agree with you under normal circumstances. I get the sense that France, the public will burn that place to the ground if they do something like that.
No, they won't.
You don't think so? France, of all
No,
places. I was in
I know
France
my
where they were
people.
doing
No,
it.
no, they
Oh,
are anesthetized. No, no,
are you
they're probably
serious?
are. They're probably the worst, the worst student in Europe as far as taking matters into their own hands.
The Yellow Vest
Because it's
movement went for like 2 years where they were
yeah,
protesting like nobody's business. I've seen France
and
take cows and put them into the middle of a highway to shut down the transportation and everything else. I get the sense that they are at the brink of chaos. I mean,
yeah,
I
and
was
what did
there.
Macron do? He sent, law enforcement. They cut off hands. They gouged out eyes. And he engaged on a tour of the country, saying, I'm compiling doléances, and complaints, and I will address them, when everything is somewhat clearer to me. And on the day he was supposed to come out and do a primetime address, Notre Dame went up in flames. So it basically, and this, so the whole thing was completely evacuated, and we never went back to it. So, and by that time, we're in 2019, so the movement's been going on since late 2017, I think. Yes,
Right.
late 2018. But it's been going on then sporadically. But by then, some controlled elements have taken control of the movement, evacuated any kind of nationalist coloring to it, and now it's all become this kind of trade union controlled. One afternoon a month. It's done. I mean, the people are exhausted. They were taking times off their job. All they were asking for was for the gasoline tax hike to be revised, and they couldn't even get that. So no, the French public is exhausted. They are exhausted. They are confused. They are utterly divided. You have no idea the social engineering going on to divide the French population in so many ways, horizontally speaking. And the system is very experienced at containing, the French Republic. When I say the French Republic, I know what I'm saying when I say that they've survived 250 years. They've survived everything, from attempted coup d'état to Vichy to the attempted coup d'état again in '58 when de Gaulle basically gave Algerian its independence. So
now, to be
the
clear,
system is extremely.
I don't mean France going up in smoke as an entity. What I mean is in a political sense that I was okay.
Article 16.
The country.
Macron will. He'll use Article 16, and he will assume full power. He will by decree, because that's allowed by the Constitution.
I know.
Yeah, Macron will. Yeah.
But I get the sense I was there when Macron's party, when they called for the European elections, and I'll let you go. I just want to get this last part up. They had the European elections. Macron's party failed miserably. They came in third place, and Macron seemed to be shocked by the whole thing and was like, "We're calling a special election." He loses badly that special election with the AFD. I'm sorry, with the National Rally having more votes, and they start horse trading in order to keep them out of power. All right.
That's right.
But over that entire time frame, they have been getting more and more support. And so it's like at a certain point, the amount of support, and correct me if I'm wrong, the amount of support is going to be as such, where it is going to be very difficult, for you to form a government like it is now, where the guy lasts for 19 hours. How is he going to form another government? They're going to be confronted with the exact same scenario that they were confronted with this time.
You'll do the same thing. You will do the same thing.
They're going to call a national election. He's going to have to. And when he does that, and the AFD numbers are going to increase. I'm sorry, I keep saying AFD. The National Rally numbers are going to increase. Macron is going to be in a rock and a hard place. Now, he could say, I'm going to be dictator, but that's going to be frowned upon. Meaning your political situation is so weak that you don't want this political party to take power that by all metrics should take power. And you're going so far beyond what the public will is that you are just effectively alienating the public by becoming dictator, emperor.
Now, let me tell you, I will give you a prediction. That would be my final. Yes. If the National Rally somehow manages to place Jordan Bardella in Matignon, which is where the prime ministership sits, I can bet you within 24 hours we have a civil war in France, organized by black blocs.
Really?
Black blocs who are paid by Brussels and CIA. They will have a color revolution. They will not be allowed to rule.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hold you down on that bet. I'll hold you down on that bet.
Yeah.
You might be entirely right. You know that country better than I do. I'm not going to act like the
National Rally will never be allowed to run the country. They will pull every strings. They will go as far as they will call out, the spirit of democratic value. They will do whatever, they are very good at that, trying to, present the whole thing in some kind of, death grip, situation. The French soul is at stake.
But the public
knows. No, but I'm talking. The National Rally, will not be allowed to take control of the institution. No way.
All I'm saying is that the public will know, meaning this will be shameless, like Romania was shameless, where they actually put the guy in jail and still try to prosecute the guy.
This is where we're at now. Throughout Europe, this is where we're at. This is where we're at.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but Jesus Christ, that will be an unmasking like nobody's business. Like people might not have entirely been paying attention to Romania, they would definitely know that the National Rally's numbers in France have skyrocketed, and that whatever they're doing in order to keep
Yeah, but
them in
National
power,
Rally is on his own. That's the problem. Is to win an election, whether parliamentary election or presidential election, you need to win the runoff. And every time the runoff comes around, they don't have allies. They're alone. So on the first round, they score 34, 35, 36%. In some jurisdiction, if we talk about parliamentary election, they may even reach out to 42%. But on the runoff, they're going to be facing triangulations with all the parties coalesced just for the election, to prevent it. They're voting against them, not to propose something, but to ward off the National Rally from winning. And this is what they're going to do again. And so, just take my word for it.
Yeah, I take your word for it. I do take your word for it, because that's exactly what they did the last time, and this is exactly why France is in the situation.
They've been doing this since 1986. 1986. 1986, there was a short time when Mitterrand allowed for the proportional system to be implemented. That got the National Front at the time was called, under Jean-Marie Le Pen, 37 seats at the National Assembly. People were, basically panicking, or trying to warn against the return of fascism
Vichy.
and all that.
Right.
Vichy, or the nostalgic of the French Algeria, the whole thing, right? And everybody remembered, the assassination attempt against de Gaulle in '62. So, and so they basically went back to the majority-based mode of voting to prevent those kind of things from happening again. Which is why the only elections these days where the National Rally is doing well is the European elections, because they are 100% proportional, right? So they win, and it's only one round. So they win those elections. 2014, they won. 2019, they won less spectacularly. 2024, they did an excellent scores, which prompted Macron to dissolve the National Assembly, because he could not just ignore this result. But at the national level, we have a system that allows coalition of parties to bar victory to the party that arrives first in the first round. That's how it works. And this doctrine, this notion of the Front Républicain, the Republican Front, meaning the defenders of freedom and democracy, will coalesce. They will do counter-natural alliances, to save the soul of the country and prevent those beyond the pale elements from ever accessing power.
But isn't that going to lead?
So there will be a lot of people that will be disappointed among the electorate of the National Rally, but they are not people who are willing to take on arms. I can tell you that. Well, as long as you have congé payé, 5 weeks paid vacation.
Well, they're trying to take
well, because that's how the system is very pervert, because you have this kind of quasi-socialist system where people are somehow being taken care of by the state from cradle to the grave.
Right.
So they're neutered. We're not dealing with people who are hungry, starving. The fridge is empty. No, the fridge is full, and the Champions League is on. There's a lot of games on Wednesday. And I got my cable subscription. Yeah, it's gonna work. It works all the time.
I know, but
Netflix. Everybody's got their Netflix subscription. No, nobody's gonna move. Nobody's gonna move.
But aren't they going to end up?
You will need 5 million people to mobilize nonstop until the top of the government.
Fair
but
enough.
That's never going to happen.
Last question. Aren't they going to end up in the exact same place that they're in now, considering that
yes,
this is how they
because the country is so fractured and divided right now that you have essentially 3 blocks. The central block, which is the block of the retirees, which are demographically speaking the largest voting bloc in France, and growing owing to the baby boomers and progress in medicine. They own most of the real estate because they bought in the 60s when real estate was dirt cheap. Because of medical advances, a significant portion of that segment still runs the country, the institutions, the French Madison Avenue, the media conglomerates, so they control the discourse. And so it's a minority in a way in terms of electoral percentage, It's about 24%. That's a hardcore Macron base. But around him, you have all those who basically leave off the system, even though they don't represent anything anymore, like Les Républicains, which is Sarkozy's former party, l'UMP, the centrist, a few of them, and you'll get also a few of the socialist party, what's left of it today. I mean, I think at the last presidential election, they scored like about 1% or something like that. I mean, they are completely demonetized, but a lot of them are literally system apparatchik, and they live off it. They are pro-Brussels, they are pro-EU, they are pro-Euro, they are pro-NATO, and they are pro-war against Russia, and they are pro-Israel. So they check all the boxes. This is the establishment bloc. Not a big bloc numerically, but extremely powerful, influential, connected, and they have help on the outside, a lot of help.
Wow, it sounds like the AFD represents the public. And look, you might be right. I mean, like I said, you know that place better than I do. I'm not gonna go beyond my station.
They're a complicated bunch, to be sure, but I know them like my pocket, and I can tell you there's not going to be a mass insurrection if one more time the national rally is cheated out of its
place,
seeming victory. Yes,
but how do they progress in this national rally? But if they, I'm sorry, I promise this was the last question. If they end up exactly where they are now, where Macron cannot form a government, they have an election, they do the same horse trading, Macron cannot form a government, then what? Is that when he just claim himself?
Well, what I think might happen is there might be a situation engineered where the national rally somehow gets, a shot at the prime ministership. Like I say, within hours, the suburbs, the media, everything will coalesce. Yeah, and they will create small but numerous foyers of insurgencies everywhere in the country. The country will be ungovernable. That's to be sure, but civil unrest will explode everywhere, and so then Macron will basically be forced to maybe dissolve the government, to bring back the peace, and declare Article 16, which the Constitution allows him to do.
Arnaud, thank you for this. I'm sorry this kept long. I didn't realize we were going to get at this kind of thing.
It's okay.
France.
No problem.
I appreciate it.
But it's important for people to understand that the French revolutionary spirit is something of the past. It doesn't exist anymore. It's the country of yeah. It's just, you got to be serious here. No, today they're a bunch. They're petty bourgeois for the most part, but they don't want to really rock the boat. They somewhat like it because they always think that. And they're very receptive to propaganda, but they think that Russia, for instance, nobody wants to live in the Russian system, when in fact we have more freedom in Russia, freedom of speech, than even in the UK. I mean, you saw the numbers.
Yes.
For 12,000 people arrested and persecuted. Yeah, it's about 3,000 in Russia for a country that's 155 million against 60 million in the UK.
Yep.
So it's about 3 times more populous, yet there are about 4 times less people being prosecuted for that. So France is kind of the same. It's comparable to the UK in that sense, but they are living so much in this nostalgia, this construct of because it's part of the national DNA. I mean, the French government, the French establishment calls France la patrie des droits de l'homme, the country where the human rights was born. But there's no human rights in France at all. You can't, freedom of speech, freedom of, entrepreneuriat, freedom of movement, even. It's a dead letter. All this is gone. To the extent it ever existed. I mean, France never even had a Magna Carta, as the UK had it. So no, it's a very centralized, authoritarian. Even the legal system is not this nicely organic common law, well thought out. Even the most basic opinion in common law bearing on a tort case, you have it's articulated. You got 70 pages, and the guy retraces all the progeny, all the prior decisions, and how the jurisprudence evolved. It's very elegant reasoning. The French legal system is a civil law system, so judges are not allowed to think out of the box. They have to apply it, and they're just kind of an extension in that sense of the executive. The executive is omnipresent and omnipotent in France, and the justice system essentially, is a transmission belt of that. So the rights of the citizens. It's been a long time since the Declaration of the Right of Man and the Citizens, in 1789 is a dead letter.
Yeah.
It has no, yeah. We're in the hands of an oligarchy in France. That's it. It's a republic on the surface, but it's a regime that is completely controlled by a few big fortunes. That's it.
Arnaud
And in the
Develay.
army, they're all in the lodges. All the top level militaries are
You said they're in the
corrupted in Mason.
lodges? Oh, you mean like
Yeah,
Masons and stuff like that? Is that what you
yes,
mean?
yes. Because you have to understand that we're not, of course, that's how it works. It's always been like since the 1960s.
I didn't know that. Okay.
It's all under control. It's all under control. All the Catholics, conservative, have been, either prevented from rising to the very top, or to the extent they're on the verge of reaching the very top. We provide them with a bargain. We say, we want to invite you to some agapes, agapas or whatever, to, meet some people. We want to introduce you to some people, right? Well, if the guy says, I'm sorry, but you can't serve two masters, and Masonic, is not quite the same as Catholic, they'll say, well, then I guess you've reached your glass ceiling, buddy. That's it. But, but all the top people, they're all under control. All of them are under control. It's all under control there. Everything, nobody sniffs. Even a lawyer in France is not going to get access to what I call a sexy case, a sexy file, a sexy dossier involving, lots of financial malversions and high-profile names. No, those files, from the moment they land on the desk of the OPJ, the officer, the regular policeman, in a police station, some calls are made at the Chancellerie, the Ministry of Justice, and then the system of the lodges kick in, and they're gonna send one of the lawyers who are part of the system, the Masonic system, because it's something that touches their interest,
right,
their way of running the country, and so it has to be under control ab initio, within the egg. If there's a problem, we can't give that to a profane, because he's going to do his job as a lawyer. And that's going to be problematic for us, because some things might be coming out and said, uttered in open court. We don't want this to happen.
How does Sarkozy mess up then? I mean, because Sarkozy got prosecuted. He's going to jail. He's not part of that.
Sarkozy was never a Mason. He's a CIA plant. So he has his own networks. Yes. But he's not one of them.
He's fair game.
Yeah. And he's too American for them. He's too, he's a CIA construct. He was always an American agent planted there. So he wrote it to the top. Because France has not been a sovereign country for decades, since de Gaulle, essentially.
Right.
They've been Giscard d'Estaing, Pompidou. They were respectively working for the Rothschild banking and all the Trilateral Commission and all those Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman, European construct.
Yes.
Mitterrand, they always blackmailed him with somewhat his sketchy role during the occupation. But the guy was so bent on arriving to the top that, he played along, he abandoned whatever, if anything, ideals he might have had, and he played along. Although he did say a few things at the very beginning of his 2 terms and at the very end, which showed that he was never in control and that the country was under assault from outside forces. But the guy was just content to be a monarch. Chirac, same thing. The only shining moment for Chirac was the no to the war in Iraq. But for the rest, he was a man under control as well. Yeah, they controlled it completely. Yes, and the last 3 we had the U.S. agent, we had a new leader, young leader, graduate Hollande.
Right.
Senior Freemason, if anything. within the French context. You have to understand. I have nothing against Freemasonry,
Oh
but
no,
in
I'm just
America
fascinated.
and in the UK, it's kind of a Rotary Club. You see, unless short of the super lodges, but all the way down, it's fun. You play bridge. You exchange with friends of good company. You have some good cognac. It's okay. I have no problem with that. But in French political life, Freemasonry is much more than they made they engineered the revolution. It is their construct. It is their their legacy.
Oh,
And there's
interesting.
a whole. It's a religion in and of itself. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It's a religious belief. It's a religious creed. And one of the first things they did, and it was a long, protracted fight, lasted a century and a half, following the 1780s, was
Mhm.
to eviscerate the Catholic identity of France. They were mortal enemies. And now that Islam, because they loathe spiritual emptiness. And for a lot of people, Islam, which is now the second religion in France, is providing a lot of, transcendence to a lot of people who are searching it. And that includes even native French.
Yeah.
They're turning to Islam more and more. And Islam is a young, vigorous religion. They don't take shit from nobody. They are very disciplined. It's not just something you practice on Sunday or on Friday, as it were.
It's commitment. Yeah.
It's something. Yeah, it's part and parcel of how you live your life, and ethics. Except for a few offshoots on the margin of Islam, like Masonic spawned Muslim Brotherhood or Wahhabism. The Islam per se, as a general proposition, is extremely by the book. You can't
Yep.
just take liberties with the truth. The truth is the truth. You see.
Yeah.
And so now they're realizing that they have a problem with Islam, and that's why they're trying to create this Huntingtonian discourse within French society. And they found they're useful idiots actually to denounce and try to antagonize and raise tensions. The National Rally is doing that. So, see, National Rally is allowed to operate as a political party because at least their agenda is congruent with the Zionist agenda. That's why we call what's going on in France right now is national sionism, national sionism. See, you can only be a nationalist if you are pro-Zionist, but you have to be pro-Zionist before you're a nationalist.
Wow.
And if you're nice, we'll invite you on TV sets and you can spit your bile and your venom against Islam, which is exactly what they want. Because while there's horizontal tensions, nobody's going to look at the oligarchy who's running the country.
Arnaud, this has been illuminating. I swear to God, it has. I'm fascinated by this conversation. I swear to God, I am. Thank you for this. Honestly, I really do appreciate it. Arnaud Develay, he is an author, political analyst. He is an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing Political Consensus. Definitely go check that out. You have a fantastic rest of your day, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Goodbye, Jamal.
Bye-bye. All right. I have. That was a fascinating conversation. I am illuminated. I'm deeply appreciate Arnaud for that. Let me bring on another great guest. We've had a great show today. Ray McGovern. How you doing, Ray? You doing okay this morning?
We're doing fine so far.
What is it so far? It will go well. I promise you. There's no chaos.
So far, so good. Good to be with you.
Ray McGovern. He's an American political analyst, former CIA agent officer. McGovern, or Ray McGovern, was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in 1980s chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and participated in preparing the president's daily briefing. That is amazing. You've had a remarkable career in this, so I'm deeply appreciative that you're joining me on this. I guess we have started the Gaza deal that has recently taken place. Donald Trump has been running around taking credit for it. He made the point of saying Netanyahu is super popular now. I don't know why Trump thinks that, but whatever. How do you trust Trump in this or Netanyahu in this? I mean, one guy was running a genocide. The other guy was paying for the genocide. And up to this point, every time let's be very clear. Hamas was willing to accept this deal back in 2022. This is basically the same deal, with the difference being Israel is allowed to keep its troops in for some kind of indeterminate amount of time. Everything, even during the Biden administration, anytime something happened, it was clearly Israel, and the Biden administration and the Trump administration, Witkoff himself, would turn around and say that damn Hamas keeps ruining the deal when it was clearly Israel. Do you trust this deal? Do you think there's something different about this deal as opposed to the other ones that are taking place?
Well, Jamal, I see that you've done your homework again. You're prepared my answer very easily. The answer is no, I don't trust them as far as I can throw them.
Yeah.
Will the Israelis adhere to phase 2 and the rest of the commitments they ostensibly made? I'm from Missouri. To show me straight, okay? You have to show me. I mean, this happened again. I mean, it happened before. I mean, earlier this year, this happened, and people were saying, well, "Oh, now that Trump has put his signature on it, Netanyahu would never welch on that deal." Well, we saw what happened, didn't we? Okay, so I think this gives a temporary boost to Trump at a time when he's in real trouble. It's going to be temporary. So far, well, the ceasefire just went into effect at 5 o'clock this morning, our time. So far, so good, but that's just ours. One probably troublesome indicator is that this fellow Marwan Barghouti, who is hands down the best candidate for the presidency of Palestine.
Yes.
He was on the list that Witkoff signed. Oh, he's not on the list that Netanyahu approved. My God, you know. Is Witkoff going to let him get away with this just to give Trump a temporary boost and give him a chance at the next Nobel Prize? Give me a break, man. So, no, you can't trust these people. I don't think that it'll be very long before those trucks laden with food and other medical supplies are continually limited in how they satisfy the hunger, the forced hunger, the forced starvation of the Gazans. And I rejoice with them that for a couple hours now, at least, there's been nobody's tried to kill the Palestinians with bombs or missiles, but they're still going to try to kill them with forced starvation. I'm Irish. That happened to my great-grandparents, okay? I know what forced starvation means, okay? And that's what they're doing. So, no, I wouldn't trust them as far as I can throw them. And again, it's kind of hard to be so skeptical given the fact that many people are rejoicing. And my God, you know, well, here's a little thing, Jamal. Just a couple hours after the deal was signed, but before it went into effect, Israeli tanks opened fire on people lining up to go home. Now, what does that tell you about the Israelis? So they're pariahs. They're pariahs for a reason. I think the collective UN people need to unite for peace and send those Indonesians and other people who volunteer to end this genocide. Send them in. That's a big hurdle, but that's what we got to do. Otherwise, the UN is not worth much at all.
Some people are making this argument that because Donald Trump has been so vocal, or at the very least his face is so prevalent on it, that this makes a difference. But you don't buy that. From your point of view.
Jamal, could you speak a little louder? Could you speak closer to the mic? My earbuds seem not to be working so well today.
No.
You're say that again?
Let me turn this up. Some people are thinking that because Donald Trump, his face is on it, that he's been so prevalent in regards to, I got a deal, this is what I was able to do, et cetera, that he's more inclined. And there's a secondary part to this also, that Israel's exhausted, meaning the number of troops that have died, for example, in Israel, the number of that have been committing suicide, that Israel wasn't able to accomplish its objectives militarily. And this is their, let's say, their way out. This is their back channel of trying to pull back to rest their forces. Do you see it that way? How do you view it in this case? That, and I know I'm asking two questions, but they're kind of related to one another. That part of the reason and rationale for this is that A, Israel is exhausted, and B, all things being equal, they needed a way out. And this was their out, kind of, in a sense, at the very least temporarily.
Well, time will tell. That's the optimistic projection. Yes, they haven't beaten Hamas. Whether Hamas will be flexible enough to abide by its share of the provisions, including disarming, if I were a Hamas person, I'd have second thoughts about that. I mean, it's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of experience, for God's sake. One thing I would note, Jamal, that maybe your listeners don't advert to, but there is international law, and under international law, occupiers have no rights. Okay, they don't have any rights when people try to throw them off. So we have the Chinese representative, a big lawyer at the UN, saying, "Look, what happened on October 7th, 2 years ago, was justified under international law. The occupier has no right to suppress the occupied, and the occupied has every right, including violent struggle, to retaliate for oppression." My God, well, that is the law. And those occupied territories were occupied in 1967, okay, on the pretext that Egypt was going to attack Israel. Now, the Israeli former prime minister, Menachem Begin, in 82, in a fit of chutzpah, at a meeting in Washington, said, "Look, let's be honest here. The Egyptians weren't going to attack us. We decided to attack them. That's what happened. That's the way it went down." And the New York Times goes, "Oh, well, isn't that interesting?" Well, as a result of that, the Israelis occupied all these territories. And now they're taking it on the chin by people who realize that they have a right to throw off this oppression, this occupation, by armed struggle. So I'm sort of a nonviolent type, but when you look at international law, it's justified, and it takes the Chinese representative to the UN to point that out.
Yeah, you have a right to defend yourself if you're being occupied. Agreed. Some other people make the argument that Israel needed to settle this issue down in order to go after Iran. That the whole issue of the Abraham Accords has apparently put Iran further up on that list of things to pacify. That this is kind of like an American plan in a sense, where it's like, okay, we've hobbled Hamas, we've hobbled Hezbollah. Iran is the big issue now that we need to effectively settle and deal with in the region, and that we needed this to be calm before going after Iran with the pursuit of the U.S. Now, pursuant to that, this came out the other day. TASS is reporting, and I'll flip to it just so you can see it. This and this. All right. TASS is reporting, according to Russian TASS, who quoted Putin, Israel conveyed a message to Iran via Putin that it does not seek a conflict and would rather prefer to, quote, resolve issues. Additionally, according to Israeli newspaper, Zionist entity is afraid that Iran will carry out preemptive strikes against them. Quote, "In my opinion, these statements have no pillars to carry any certainty. If anything, 2024, 2025 has taught us to be vigilant at all times." Give me your take on that, that a secret message was spirited to Putin by Israel saying, hey, we have no issue. We don't want to attack Iran. We just want to resolve these issues amicably. Give me your take on that. Apparently that was coming from TASS.
Well, many of my contemporaries, my colleagues, have been expressing themselves as being convinced that it's just a matter of weeks or so before the Israelis will attack Iran again, and that the U.S., in the person of Trump, will support it just as they did back in whenever it was, June or so. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, now, there are problems with that, and I feel a little bit at a disadvantage because lots of people know more about Iran and Israel than I do, but it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, last time, the Israelis took it on the chin. Nobody knows this, but the Iranian, after they recovered from the surprise attack, right? Surprise attack, sort of like Pearl Harbor. When they recovered, they retaliated and they wreaked havoc on some of the key installations in Israel. And they can do that again. They even held back some of their more sophisticated missiles. So, are the Israelis going to commit suicide by trying to it's not going to be regime change. There's going to be more assassinations and stuff. Are they really going to do it? I don't know. And, when you look at Iran now, it's part of BRICS. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese are very serious. The Russians sent a great big aircraft, the biggest ones they have, transport aircraft of all kinds of weaponry. Just this a couple of days ago, the Russians have made clear. Look, we want to make sure that Iran knows that they're not alone in this thing. That's new. The Russians have an interest in this. You're damn straight they do. I mean, they're soft on the belly. That Iran has always been a really tough thing for them to handle. So, Chinese, of course, depend on Iranian oil for about 20% of their oil consumption, I think. So these big powers are now involved, and they're talking to Netanyahu. And I think they're reassuring them that, not reassuring, but telling Netanyahu, look, the Iranians developed their own hypersonic missiles of the kind that the U.S. doesn't even have. You saw what happened last time. You want that to happen again? Besides, we have these two big brothers here, China and Russia. So my guess, in all logic, is that it's not going to happen. But who knows? McGovern's been wrong before.
Okay, fair enough. Why do you think that people think it's going to take place? I mean, I have a rationale for why I think it's going to take place, because it feels like a playbook. Like, get the European Union to put snapback sanctions, and then the U.S. and Israel can turn around and say, well, hey, they're pulling out of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, or, they're kicking out the IAEA, which they should, by the way, and use that as a pretext to go after them. Yeah. But as you point out, they took a beating that last time around. And so maybe you're right. I don't know. I suppose we will see. I mean, because a lot of people think that this is imminent at this point.
Well, again, that's what most people think. I talked with Scott Ritter yesterday. He no longer is convinced that it's inevitable, where most people are saying. Yeah. So it's a matter of, what incentive Netanyahu would have to do this. And again, it really all depends on if Trump gives him to believe that Trump will support him. Now, last time around, there's evidence that Trump reassured this guy that, you started off and we'll finish it. But the interesting way that it finished was that when the Israelis were taking it on the chin with hypersonic missiles raining down on them, and inside Israel, they said to Big Daddy, hey, Daddy Trump, please get a ceasefire right away. And he did, okay? So, I mean, there's an object lesson of what happens. I've often said here, the Iranians have a deterrent now. Mm-hmm. It's not a nuclear weapon. They don't need a nuclear weapon, and they are not working on a nuclear weapon. They haven't been, at least since 2003, okay? We would know about it, even absent the IAEA, and there's some question as to whether they go back into those sites. So, let me just see if I still have this little book here. Oh, yeah. You remember this appearance of Netanyahu at the UN, right? Okay, so he's got 90%. Oh, man, look at that red line there. Okay, now what does that have to do with? That has to do with enrichment, not a weapon, okay? Yeah. Now, enrichment is separate and distinct from carving out a nuclear weapon. And the conflation of these two things, where Netanyahu has for years been doing, look at that enrichment, they're almost there. Well, until we see two things, some evidence that they are working on a nuclear weapon, and some evidence that the religious edict, it's called a fatwa, okay? Muslims take this very, very seriously. That was introduced by the Supreme Leader 2003. They stopped if they had a program at all, okay? And they'd have to reverse that fatwa. It would have to be public. They would have to have a debate in the parliament, and the Supreme Leader and the high national security people would say, okay, forget about it. We have a new fatwa. It says go ahead and develop a nuclear weapon. None of that's going to happen. Why? Because they don't need it. They don't need it. They have enough retaliatory capability now with all these hypersonic missiles and everything else to do Israel in. And that's why I'm reluctant to think that Netanyahu, even if he's aided and abetted by Trump, will go off and try to do the same thing he did in early spring or late spring, summer.
Speaking of Netanyahu, there's an argument that was often made that part of the reason that Netanyahu was continuing the war because he needed the war, that if it wasn't for the war, he would effectively have been thrown out on his ear at this point. Does this kind of ceasefire, what does it mean for his political stability in Israel, especially since there's a large coalition of people that hate the fact that he even agreed to this deal in the first place? Is this political situation in Israel stable or unstable at this point, given this kind of quote unquote ceasefire?
It's stable as long as he has these extreme right wingers together with him. It's not only a political problem for him, it's a personal problem. If he ceases being prime minister, he goes to jail. There are 3 court cases pending, pretty much not a knockdown case where corruption of one kind or another. He and his wife, they had the bridal suite, as I imagine it, in some prison, and they're ready to put him in there as soon as he's out of office. So, you know, here's a guy that has this deep personal stake in this, right? So now when you're thinking about how that motivates him, well, could a person, just to try to avoid prison, do genocide? Forced starvation? Well, he's doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Would a person like that shy away from trying to use a mini nuke if in extremis against the Iranians? Well, I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, the guy is, well, he's predictably bad. So, you know, I have to look at the worst case here and figure out, well, is there any chance at all that Trump, now that he's riding high on the ceasefire, at least for the last few hours, whether he'll see fit to restrain Netanyahu, only because the Russians and the Chinese saying, look, this time we're in with him. We're already giving him some really sophisticated air defense systems, and they have some of their own indigenously produced. So this time it's not going to be the same as the last time. And you want Israel to be destroyed? Do you want them in extremis to try to use a nuke? I don't think you want to do that. So to the degree there are a couple of people who are not arch Zionists within the Trump circle, I think that the reason may prevail, not because of any shrinking away from doing this kind of thing, but just of the practical consequences that one can now expect.
Yeah, but I'm asking this in the context of his own political futures. But your point is he's stable currently in the government, even if the ceasefire stays in play. He's not on his way out in this case.
Well, I don't think the ceasefire is going to the next stages are going to be implemented. I would be surprised. Last time they weren't. So if they're not, as I predict, then the hardliners are going to smile and say, oh, it didn't work this time either. Oh, isn't that terrible? It didn't work, you know. So on the one hand, Hamas has shown incredible staying power, okay? That would mean to me that they're not going to disarm themselves. My God, why would they? On the other hand, you have Trump needing a temporary victory. Look, he's taken on the chin. The government shut down, for God's sake. And the last thing I'll say, Jamal, is that as the teenagers used to say, Trump he's not okay, okay? He's not okay. I mean, you don't have to look at his UN speech. You don't have to look at his speech before those military people in Quantico. Look at the cabinet meeting yesterday. He opens it up and he goes on for 40 minutes. I counted them. I have to watch these things, right? About various and sundry, right? And it's just so discombobulated. And this time he's not talking off the cuff. He's reading, or somebody had somebody write this stuff down for him. And he's so, you know, it had nothing to do with the main issues. It all had to do with the cabinet fawning and saying, Mr. Trump, you should have the Nobel Prize because look what you've done. You finally did a deal with the Israelis, and oh, it's going to be great. Okay, so that's what all of them did. It was embarrassing. It was so disgusting. Okay, everyone, Mr. Trump, this Rubio, oh, Mr. Trump. So it was fawning, and that's what he wanted. Okay, then he said, oh, well, maybe some of you like to have something to say. Yeah, the cabinet meeting is supposed to reports from the cabinet. Just a few. We don't have too much time. So, I mean, it was just very, very embarrassing. And I think that as the Russians and the Chinese look at Trump, they're saying, look, this guy is not okay. And number one, what the Russians do is look, let's not provoke him. Let's fit in with these people who well, let's not, fawn over him, but let's he's a great person to talk to. Putin, I felt like he's an easy person to talk to. And, we think he's sincere. We think he wants to do a deal on Ukraine and all this stuff. So what they're doing is bend over backwards to see if they can work with this situation where they have to flatter the guy, because there is a desire, in my view, deep down in Trump to settle Ukraine. He's got no real alternative. Putin is one. Putin is willing to give him enough lipstick to put on that pig of defeat, and it's just a matter of whether Trump can face down the right wingers in his own cabinet, the Zionists, and the people who really want to support the Europeans. The Europeans to do what?
The Russians have said
Tomahawk missiles. Tomahawk missiles? That's a canard. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I agree with you, because my thought was always that he was always bluffing with the Tomahawk missiles. And for me, it wasn't a real issue until it was a real issue. Like until you actually send those and you have arming them, etc. I didn't take it entirely as a fully real issue. But do you really think that the Russians are saying that I think the expression was, the foundation has cracked to the core, and that the building would have to be rebuilt. Like they went very far, and saying that all momentum from Alaska has stopped. Trump is a weak leader who effectively takes the point of view of anybody who comes into the room last. I mean, give me your take on that. I mean, do you think there's any chance, especially with him talking about tomahawks? Because whether it's real or not, you are effectively saying we are going to fire missiles at Russia directly. Mm-hmm. Our hands doing it. That's what he's threatening in this case. Yeah. Give me your take on all.
We in veteran intelligence professionals for sanity compare notes. We give each other sanity checks. That's one reason we added sanity to our name. Yeah. And talking with Scott Ritter on all this stuff, we finally concluded very easily that there ain't no Tomahawk missiles they give to Ukraine, even through Western or even through European leaders, which is the channel that's got to be used now according to U.S. policy. There aren't any. They were all dismantled to enable the Nuclear Forces Treaty to prevail back there in 1987. Now, could they build some? Yeah, of course. Or could they sell some to, let's say, the Netherlands? There is a contract. Yeah, okay. What's the date of arrival? 3 years from now. Well, 3 years from now, and then how do the Dutch get them to Ukraine with the Russians not seeing them? I mean, it's really preposterous. So it's a red herring. It's a canard, and the fact that it was raised by Kellogg, for God's sake, and the vice president. Oh yeah, well, this is under discussion. Well, the way the Russians handle that is, wait a second. Our primary focus is to have a good relationship with the United States. Didn't Kellogg get that message? Well, why does he speak in a way at cross purposes of that? That's Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson. So, you had Yerepkov saying this stuff. Oh, the foundations are cracking. But then yesterday you had Ushakov, who's the guy closest to Putin on these matters, saying, look, no, Alaska still going forward. The Europeans are the fly in the ointment on Ukraine. There are other things we have going. And it's true, as Ryabkov said, even though we're talking, we're not making much progress. It's simple to resolve things like the Obama sort of taking ownership of our property, our diplomatic. Oh, here's Ushakov. Yeah, let's see him.
Yeah.
И контакты проводятся как раз на основе тех договоренностей и тех пониманий, которые были
He's speaking in Russian, so it's not really going to help us. But basically, he's saying exactly what you're saying, that the foundations are still there from the Alaska summit, even though progress has been.
So, the foundations are cracking, according to the Deputy Foreign Minister, Ryabkov. But there's some foundations that were built in Alaska, and they're still pursuing them. So this just by way of saying that the Russians have given priority to repairing the relationship with the United States. Ukraine is secondary. When the U.S. strikes Iran with Israel, the Russians say, okay, that's bad, but it's secondary, okay? And you have Ushakov. Now, he was ambassador to the United States. He's been with Putin forever, okay? And they still think that there's some hope to work out an arrangement on Ukraine. Russia is winning. It's just about, it can go all the way to the Dnieper River in the next couple of months without any trouble at all. But, get this. Putin doesn't want to do that. What he wants to do is say, look, let's negotiate. Sure, we have the upper hand, but we're in this for bigger purposes. We want you to recognize our core interests, and that means no Ukraine in NATO. That means a cordon sanitaire where you can't, where no one can violate our territory. And these things were worked out in Istanbul in April of 2022. We got to get back to that. We have Istanbul 2, the fly in the ointment is Zelensky, and these benighted hopes that we can do things like tomahawks. We can't do tomahawks. And as soon as the West European leaders get onto the fact that, hey, this is really a feckless exercise, and as soon as they realize that Putin's not going to be betrayed again by the West, Angela Merkel yesterday says, we fooled them on the Minsk Accords, and we're going to listen to them. And then she said, now the Baltic people, they said, look, don't even talk to the Russians. And so I said, okay. So there's dissension within NATO. There's a worse person in charge of Germany right now. But their social safety net is falling apart. The French government's had their, fourth or fifth prime minister in 1 year. And UK Stormer's popularity is, I think, like 19% today. So these people are going to be falling by the wayside. The big thing here is Putin is patient. He's got the upper hand. He doesn't want any big trouble. And he's working. He's actually kind of, what's the word? He's trying to appease. He's trying to appease Trump by saying, look, no matter what you say or what you do, we still put priority on repairing this relationship. And that's precisely what Ushakov said yesterday. Last thing I'll say is, when you study Russian and Soviet history, you study things like Vladimir Lenin, right? And he said, "Revoluция проходит zigzagami." The Russian zigzag, you got it? Okay, so zigzagami is the instrumental case for by zigzags, okay? So the revolution proceeds by zigzags, okay? So you say one thing one day, you say another thing the other day to keep people off balance. The Russians are still not above that. You have Ryabkov saying 2 days ago, then you have Ushakov saying, no, everything's... So you got to take this into account. And with respect to Trump, he's not immune from zigzagami either, but you have to wait 4 days after he says something to see if he reverses himself. So the Russians have to deal with this. He's got the fingers on the codes. And uh, yeah, Putin is so perspicacious that these reports that the military or the stronger people in Russia are getting impatient with him. Well, I believe them, but when you have an 80% approval rate, I think you can be as relaxed as Putin showed himself to be at Valdai. He may be guilty of hubris, the Greek tragic flaw that felled many a Greek hero. And you don't know that you're guilty of hubris until you're gone. But I
Yeah.
doubt that. He seems to be well in control, and we're lucky to have him. For God's sake, God, I hate to think of what we would get if a hardliner came in there, because the Russians have capabilities now that we never have had, and their military is stronger than ours. It pains me to say that. I was in our military. It's the first time that I can say that, because they exceed our capabilities in every realm, including the strategic realm. There's still a balance of terror, but when push comes to shove, they could do things like around the South Pole, for God's sake, or through submarines that we cannot do. So it's a very precarious thing. I just hope that Trump is getting the right scoop on this. What I hear from some of the people advising him, like Kellogg, that the Russians are losing or that their economy is imploding. I don't know where the hell he's getting that stuff, but apparently he repeats it. So it's very, very zigzagamy, if you will.
Can I get two more questions? One
Sure.
has to do with, is it really the Europeans? I mean, Donald Trump always has the ability to walk. And many of the reports that came out pointed out that Europe was terrified that Trump was going to walk, which is why they went with the whole daddy stuff. And sure, we'll accept your tariffs. And basically, we'll take the 10% weapon sales, meaning Europe's economies are burning to the ground. And yet they're still being, let's say, very permissive of pretty much anything that the United States wants, especially in regards to Trump. They seem very submissive. So is it really the Europeans when the United States at the end of the day is the one that has the whip hand in this relationship? Same thing with Zelensky. Trump could say, I'm out. I'm done. Figure it out. But he hasn't said that. And he's stuck with this. And there's some people who honestly believe that the Europeans are just a proxy for the US, that what the Europeans are doing are a way for the US to get some kind of leverage by these kind of provocations of drones, or these kind of provocations of, almost like they're trying to create some kind of false flag situation. Is it really Zelensky and the Europeans, or is the issue Trump?
That's a really good question. One cannot speak of an undivided leadership in Washington. You have the Kellogg's, so you have all these hardliners that work with the Europeans. I mean, Kellogg is in Europe more than he's in Washington, for God's sake, trying to cajole them and all those kind of things. So with respect to Trump and what he wants to do, I think you look to J.D. Vance, and what he said is precisely what you mentioned before. We're done. We're done with Ukraine. He said that 4 weeks ago, okay? We're done with Ukraine. We're not going to put any more money in it. Well, what we're willing to do, this is what we'll do. We'll sell weaponry that way. They got the best weaponry. We're going to sell them to the Europeans. And the Europeans, they buy them, and then they'll give them to the Ukrainians. What's wrong with that? Well, we don't have any weapons to sell and won't for years. Really, we have our own defense needs. We have no weapons to sell. The Europeans have no money to buy those weapons, as you pointed out, Jamal. And the Ukrainian soldiers, there won't be any in another couple of months, So outside of that, it's a great, great plan. I mean, God, how? And Americans just can't. Well, that's why I just really enjoy being on your program. This seems very simple to me, just very basic, okay? The Americans realize this. No. Putin is bad. The Russians are. Last thing I'll say here is that we got into this big fix because of Russiagate.
Right.
Americans have been brainwashed to hate Russia, hate Putin, and no other person than my good friend Jack Matlock, with whom I worked when he was head of the Soviet desk at State, and I was head of the Soviet foreign policy branch at CIA, and who later became ambassador to. What he said just within the last week is, look, the real reason we're in such a fix is because relationship with Russia has been damaged so badly from Russiagate. This made up, manufactured, totally false charges that Russia is responsible for Trump and that, they defeated Hillary and all that kind of stuff. It all depends on how brainwashed the American people are. And if it weren't for people like you, Jamal, and other people I can talk to, and we're gaining strength, I think. We're getting people listening to us. They say, well, this is a charade, wasn't it? I hate to say it was a hoax because that was so Trump. That's what Trump says, right? So, and I don't want to say hoax, but it was a hoax. Now, does that put me in Putin's pocket? No, it doesn't. It's just reality. So that's the fix we're in. We have to re-educate the American people. Well, look, we were taken down a garden path here. There was no Russian intercept, no Russian hacking of the DNC. All that stuff is available in court testimony, sworn testimony, and all that stuff. And it's coming out now, but it's catch-22. Nobody knows about it because the media is suppressing it. We have documentary evidence of what James Comey said or did, and John Brennan and all these other guys. And Tulsi Gabbard has let it out there. But guess what? Most of your audience, I dare say, has not read any of it because it's not been replayed in any adequate way in what we call the mainstream media. Well, mainstream media is going down. We're going up. So let's have a lot of hope that we can prevail here because, as my friend Julian Assange has put it, if wars can be started by lies, they can be ended by truth. Did you have one more question?
START Treaty. So that is supposed to end on February. That cannot be restarted once that ends. There seemed to be no movement on that either. Now, on the positive side, Russia
you're talking about new start now? Yeah,
a new
okay.
START treaty.
I'm with you.
Fortunately, Russia has made the point of saying attack the Tomahawks, and those are two separate issues. So I think that's good.
Yeah, that's a really key point. Yeah, that's what Ryabkov said. I may even have it. Yeah, I do. Ryabkov 2 days ago said, look, quote, Russia does not associate the issue of Tomahawk deliveries to Kiev, which is a canard, as I mentioned before, does not tie that with the New START proposal toward the United States. These are two separate matters, period, end quote. That's really important. Why? Because the first one's a canard, okay, the Tomahawk. The second one is damn real, okay? There's no possibility we can renew the New START treaty, but what the Russians are saying, look, there are strict provisions on the number of offensive missiles that we can have. Let's stick to that for another year and see if we can't negotiate some sort of arrangement where the treaty just doesn't fall apart. Right. It'll end, but the provisions that are important, limiting offensive missiles. If you could sign on to that, that would be really good. Now, what happened? Well, at Valdai, Putin and the rest of them said, well, we're still waiting for an official response on that. It's been almost 3 weeks, if memory serves. Now, is there an unofficial response? Oh, yeah, well, Trump in one of his little interviews with the press, he's asked about this. And yeah, I think it'll be a good idea. Well, isn't that great? Yeah, it'd be a good idea. Well, actually, the Russian guy Kirillov picked up on that and said, oh, this is a really good sign. That was a very hopeful sign. So I don't know what they're doing. The good thing is that they are in touch, as the Biden people would not be in touch with the Russians. They are in touch. I think they've been reassured by the business about the Tomahawk, which they realize is a non-issue. And they probably are talking about, look, there's no reason at all why you can't rise to the occasion and at least agree to abide by the provisions limiting the number of offensive missiles under New START. I hope and pray that that happens because that would be a big thing and that would allow negotiators such as still exist in the State Department to get together with the Russian opposite numbers and do some serious work on preventing the unleashing of strategic armaments, which is something that will do no good for anybody.
Ray, you are fantastic. You really are. I appreciate you joining me. Thank you for this. Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern is an American political activist with, and former CIA officer. McGovern was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in 1980s, chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and participated in preparing the Presidential Daily Brief. Ray, thank you for this. You have a
Thank
good
you,
day.
Jamal. Good luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. We have come to the end. Ray is fantastic. He has my deepest appreciation for joining me. I always appreciate those conversations. I don't know if the audience knows it or recognizes it, but when you talk to people who've been in the machine versus people who've been out of the machine, there's a different take. And I find those takes to be valuable, whether you're talking about Jeff Rich, whether you're talking about Ray McGovern. I'm trying to think of somebody else who was, and John Kiriakou is another one. They have a perspective based on real world phenomena experience of engaging in a system that oftentimes people like me, other people who we may talk to, are seeing externally. And so I always find that's a really interesting tension that gets created. And I always find those points of view to be valuable, very valuable, actually. So Ray has my deepest appreciation for joining me on this. And I thank him for it. Because when you're outside of it, it's hard to know. It's like I can only see what is above and only from below. I don't know what's going on in the machine. And so you're stuck with this notion of saying, okay, well, this is what I think seems to be happening based on what they're doing. But when you're inside of it, you're seeing the mechanics work. And sometimes you can't really predict what they're doing on the inside just by looking at it from the outside. Those perspectives are valuable and those perspectives are helpful. So no, Ray has my thanks. We've come to the end. We've come to the end. We have 4,130 people here today. I don't know why today was so popular, but fair enough. You guys have my thank you. Look, if you want to support the content, please like this video. Please share this video. If you are a new person who just showed up here for whatever particular reason, we do this every day. Feel free to join from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. The content is typically this way. So if you enjoyed today's show, you would enjoy the shows going forward. Feel free to come back. You can always support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, Super Stickers, all of those things are helpful. These shows are often demonetized just because we deal with issues of war, peace, drama, chaos, etc. So your support helps the show keep sticking along, and you have my deepest appreciation for it. Yeah, good show today. Really good show today. I got to be honest. I had no intention of keeping Arnaud that long. Arnaud was supposed to be on for 30 minutes. He ended up staying for an hour. Shout out to him, and I thank him deeply for it. I had been itching to have a conversation about France, and he was not the person I thought I was going to have that conversation with, but it ended up being a damn good conversation, and I really appreciate him for having a conversation with me. He was like, I know my people. My people are not going to revolt. I don't, it's not that I think France is going to revolt. It's just looking at this from an American perspective, we are very anesthetized. And so when I see France, I think of them as being more aggressive in regards to protests. Arnold looks at it and is like, dude, I know you have that point of view. No, that is not going to happen. Look, I think France is in a bad way, though. And I think even he would agree with me that if you have an election, because look, the radio station sent me to cover the French election. No, well, the European elections, the parliamentary elections. I end up going to Austria because my ex-girlfriend was in Austria, and she spoke the language. She spoke German. And so she was, among other reasons, my gateway into having conversations with people who are effectively on the ground in order to get a sense of their points of view. It was very interesting because the politics and the things that people said sound very similar to things people say here in the States when they're talking about their electoral system, even though their electoral system is somewhat different. I remember covering the election as the results came in. Macron's, I believe it's called Renaissance Party, failed miserably. When I say failed, I mean failed, like humiliatingly failed. Macron immediately says, I'm calling snap elections, just out the blue. And people were like, he has clearly lost his mind. Now, the reason they say he clearly lost his mind is because the European parliamentary elections, on some level, was getting across what was taking place in France. And Macron seems to have this belief that there is no way possible that National Rally is that popular. Macron was wrong. He was wrong. Not just wrong, damn wrong. And what you ended up with was a National Rally taking the pole position in the first series of votes. Second series of votes, what you ended up with was horse trading. And so you got this, let's say one party would say, hey, I'll give you these votes if you give me these votes, so we'll be stronger in this location so you can be strong in the other location. They did this in order to keep the National Rally from out of power. All right. But you have a problem. They're obviously popular, extremely so. You wouldn't have had to do that if they weren't, because left to their own devices, they would have won. So what did Macron do? A left-wing party ended up getting, or conglomeration of left-wing parties, ended up getting the majority in the primary position. Macron looks over the party and says, you're not getting the nod. I'm going to pick my own person to form a government, which is what he did. So he formed a government without the political support of the main parties in France. Now, I remember being at the radio station saying, this is a coup. This is a coup. How are you doing this? How on earth are you pulling this off? Now, obviously, the political parties were upset. And my boss at the time was like, Macron is going to be able to pull a coup. He even said it. He says, watch, he's not going to select those various people of the left-wing party or the group of left-wing parties. And that is exactly what happened. So my point is, Macron created this political chaos because you've effectively put somebody in a position where they didn't have the underlying support in order to maintain the position as you would do, let's say, in a rational parliamentary system. And so what happens? That guy fails. That guy fails. So Macron puts another guy in. That guy fails. So Macron puts another guy in. That guy fails in 14 hours. So what happens now? You put another guy in, and invariably you run into the exact same issue, the budget. You can't get it passed. And not just can't get it passed, you don't have the constituent political support to even do it. And so what happens after that, when the next government collapses? Snap elections. And when you have snap elections, the growth of National Rally, which has increased their numbers, becomes an issue. Because one or two things takes place. National Rally wins again in the first round. There's that. So then you have horse trading, as Arnaud. Both of us agree on this part. Horse trading, once again. Now the catch becomes, is there enough horse trading in order for you to keep the National Rally out? And when you do it, and let's say they increase their numbers from one year to the next year, what does the public say? The public obviously knows that this party has, I don't know, let's say 40% support. Heads and above everybody else. How on earth do you create a situation where you, as Macron, come up and say, hey, I know these guys have the overwhelming majority of political support, but I'm going to put somebody else in that spot. It becomes more and more difficult as time goes on for you to do that. How many times can you get away with that? Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times? At a certain point, it becomes obvious that you're not living in a parliamentary system, and Lord knows you're not living in any kind of liberty or democracy. You're living in something else. You're living in this kind of top-down political process where the public will is being thwarted. And understand how bizarre and ironic this is. This is like them saying, in order to protect democracy, we need to destroy democracy, which is what the Democrats were saying here in the United States. In order to protect democracy, we need to destroy democracy, meaning public will, F that. Public doesn't know what they're doing. The problem with that point of view is you have people who are just oligarchs and who are wedded to a particular system and a particular order that they don't want removed, they don't want undermined, they don't want changed. And so what they're considering protecting democracy is protecting a top-down oligarchical system, not democracy. Those are different things. And let's be very honest, part and parcel to the reason that you have a system where the public votes and the public chooses is because the public may recognize this doesn't work in the face of a group of bureaucrats who want to maintain things in the way it is for whatever particular reason. Maybe it enriches them. Maybe they have a political ideology. And the public is like, we're done with it. This is not in the best interest. This is not helping us. We need change. Whereas the oligarchical, bureaucratic system says, no. This is Romania, right? Moldova, Czech Republic. At the very least, Czech Republic was able to choose a different person. I'm trying to point out that how often or how long can you get away with doing that before the public loses it in recognition that this idea of liberty is nonsense. This idea of democracy is nonsense. This is something else, and respond to that. Now, Arnaud could be completely right that, look, man, these guys have Netflix. They have soccer matches to watch. You can get a baguette. The croque monsieurs in France are fantastic. So you can sit there, smoke in front of the Eiffel Tower with a cappuccino and a croque monsieur. If I had that every day, oh, happy man, happy man. If there was a chess club nearby where I can walk to my croque monsieur in the morning, sip my cappuccino, write up my show, stand in front of the Eiffel Tower, and be like, let me see what else. Smoke a cigarette. Don't even smoke, but F it, smoke a cigarette. Go play chess, do my show, and do that every day. Maybe I'm disengaged from the political system, which is his point. Modernity. That for all intents and purposes, their life is not completely miserable, despite the things that France and the government may be doing to make their lives more difficult. It's not miserable enough for them to respond. This is kind of the America thing, right? It's like you die younger, your lives are more desperate, you pay more for healthcare, you pay more for just the basic expenses, your wages haven't gone up, even though your expenses have gone through the roof from the standpoint of healthcare, housing, just even basic things like cell phones. Those things weren't necessarily there in the 60s when they were talking about real wages. Meaning your life has gotten worse. And maybe from generation to generation, you don't necessarily see the degradation because you're within a time context, a temporal context. But if you could be above it all and have notes from outside of time, you can see it. His point is, and I guess it's kind of a similar point to America, things have to get so bad that the very act of standing still is worse than the very act of changing those things. Where's that point? Who knows? On some level, that's subjective, right? But I will say that if you are a government that are living off a reputation of liberty, that is your mindset, that is your mind. That may be one of your myths. And whether it's a myth or not, people do respond on some level to those myths in their self-conception of self. This sounds weird, but your self-conception. Think of the Brits. Think of the Europeans making all of these proclamations. These guys used to be masters of the world, where now they are fledgling power. Britain is like a third world country. You have Europe that has fallen so low that in the issue of tech, AI, industry, all of the things that matter, they don't matter. Governments are collapsing. The economies are taking a hit massively. And they are effectively functioning as vassals of the United States. And yet, Chaos, who I think is gorgeous, but she's dumb as a box of rocks, despite the fact that I think she's gorgeous. And she, backed by the mighty Estonian military, will make grand proclamations of this and that. None of it matters. No power at all in this process. And I'm pointing out that these are self-conceptions. These are how do we view ourselves in the larger world. But just because you put on a nice dress, and many of those flowing dresses are gorgeous, just because you make yourself up very nice, and you go out and give a speech, doesn't mean that speech matters, nor does it mean that your self-conception is shared by anyone else. But that being said, though, it does matter in the way that you respond and engage the world. I give you an example, a Star Trek example, since I like Star Trek. Strange New Worlds, Christopher Pike. Strange New Worlds, and in fact, I think it was Discovery. Discovery sucks, but Christopher Pike, that episode was great. Pike had a mission. Pike had to go and get what was called a time crystal. Pike goes down to Kronos. He goes and grabs the crystal. And this crystal has a kind of mystical capability of being able to deal with issues of temporal reality, temporal mechanics, time. When Pike touched the crystal, he sees a vision of himself being burned alive and ends up in this kind of wheelchair where he's just sitting there and there's a button that goes blink or blink off, which means yes or no. Now, anybody who watched the original show knows what happens to Pike. Everybody knows what happens to Pike. Pike doesn't know what happens to Pike, but we know. And so when we see that happen to Pike in this future time frame, Pike freaks out. Pike lets the crystal go, goes scurrying back, panicking. And what does Pike say? Pike says, after he pulls his shit together, I'm a Starfleet captain. It is my job. Now, he snaps the crystal off and goes scurrying away, stuck with his fate. Because what the Klingon told him was, if you take that crystal, whatever you've seen will happen as a flat fact. There's no changing it. It is set in stone. It is like God himself made the proclamation. Pike pulls his shit together and takes the crystal, accepting his fate. Why did Pike accept his fate? If Pike was just a man in the way that he conceived of himself, then Pike lets the crystal go, goes back home, and hooks up with some random green chick. But Pike didn't do that because in Pike's self-conception, Pike wasn't just a man. He was a Starfleet captain. And that captain had responsibilities, these ideas of himself and what that means in his own self-conception, in which case he takes it, snaps it off. His view of himself made him more than just a man. I'm saying that's a lot of wood to chop to make the point. How you conceive of yourself matters. It determines what you will do, what you believe you're capable of doing. And while your estimates may be off on some level it dictates your capabilities. If I think, let's say a person says, I am taking dialysis treatments, and because of that, I have all of these other things and ideas and descriptions that go along with this. And so I can't travel. I can't eat this. I can't do this. I can't go skydiving. I can't go bungee jumping. I can't go rafting. I can't have functional relationships. I can't do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's your self-conception. Is it real? No. Do you believe it? Yes. And with the very fact that you believe it, change and affect what you do in the world? Absolutely. Your ideology about yourself matters. Self-conception matters. I'm saying that the fact that France conceives of itself in a particular way, that it may be living off of these kind of reputations of its past and what it means to be French, matters. Maybe not in the larger world of how it deals with other people, but internally for its domestic politics, it absolutely matters. And if they are continuing to do this thing of, you don't have a democracy, this is not liberty, you don't get to choose who your political people are, you don't get to change the direction of the politics, despite the fact that the very point of the elections is to change, sometimes in dramatic ways, the direction of a particular country because the public recognizes that it doesn't work. Does a country that believes in liberty not respond? Yes, a lot of wood to chop, but I'm trying to nail the point down. How long can they go before they finally come to this assessment that this is not a parliamentary democracy? This is not liberty in the way that we know it and understand it. Regardless of how good the Krog masseurs are, how good the cappuccinos are, how beautiful the Eiffel Tower is to watch, but regardless of all of these things, how great it is to smoke at 2 a.m. in a restaurant where the waiter leaves you alone for several hours and you just sit there and smoke and, drink whatever. Regardless of how nice that is, these kind of French qualities. I can't believe that at a certain point, it doesn't great. I don't know what that point is. Arnaud could be completely right. You can F over the National Rally once again. How often can you do that? And how many times and how long does it get to the point where they recognize we've lost something? This is not what we want. This is not in our best interests. This is not what it means to be, quote unquote, French, whatever that means, in their subjective point of view of what that means. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But I get the sense That can't go on forever. I get the sense that can't go forever. I mean, yeah, Germany is spying on the AfD, like literally spying on the AfD, and will likely try to criminalize the party if indeed the party gets to the point of winning an election. But think of what that means, though. Like, honestly, put that in context. A political party is so popular that they may win. And so you need to criminalize the political party, destroying democracy to save democracy. What the hell is that, right? What is that? Is it saving democracy if you have to destroy it? And are you the good guy if you have to actually do that? And do you have other biases that are at play as you are going about doing that? Meaning, what is wrong with your country where it's gotten to the point where that's where you need to be, where you've lost all sorts of connection to the political space? And by the way, I'm not in Europe, but I don't have to be. I live in the US. And we are going through something very similar, where they did everything in their power to put Donald Trump in a cage. They said he was the end of all things and everything else. And you have to ask yourself, how on earth did you lose your connection with the American public to the degree that a con artist who tried to overthrow the government the first time around wins the election? How? That is not a singular event, meaning that is not something that people just woke up that morning and said, we're voting for Trump. That is a radical loss of connection with the American public. And you have to engage that in honest terms. And if you need to get to the point of saying, well, we just need to overthrow democracy in order to save it, you missed the boat. I mean that every bit as much with the Democrats. Do you know that at one point, the Democratic Party for 50 years had control of the House of Representatives, with the exception of twice. Meaning up until the point of Bill Clinton taking office, the Democratic Party held the House of Representatives for 50 years, with the exception of, I think, like twice. That is a level of dominance that is breathtaking. What changed? How did that fall apart? How did you have this radical disconnect with the American public where they've gotten to the point of putting in a con artist? And yeah, Democrats are trash. So don't misunderstand me. There's reasons for it. But I'm trying to point out that Democrats took it upon themselves as, well, we are the defenders of democracy, so we need to do everything in our power to overthrow democracy in order to save democracy. Which means Trump may win. And because Trump may win, he is such a clear and present danger that we need to do everything in our power to put him in a cage. We need everything in our power to get the media and everything else. We need to do everything in our power to get impeachment hearings and all of this stuff. And then what does Trump do when he wins? He does the exact same thing and does it that much more aggressively by going after his political opponents. How did saving democracy work for you in that case? It didn't work at all. We've screwed over and we've lost something significant. That's not just in the US, that's also in Europe. And what we've lost is this understanding that governments aren't magical things. When I'm at a chess tournament, I used to be a monster at chess. In fact, I may get some games in. At some point, you're so good, and you're so good for so long, that it feels like it's a magical thing. It feels like it's intrinsic. Like you just wake up in the morning, you're just that powerful. It's like you're just burning with power. It's just coming off of you in waves. But it's not. It never is. It's skill. It's something that you learned. It's something that you maintain. It's kind of like maintaining your weight. You have to cut down on the hamburgers. You have to cut down on what you eat. You have to walk a little bit more. You have to do et cetera in order to maintain a particular thing. Well, for chess, it was skill. You have to read, play chess, play tournaments, play blitz, play et cetera. You had to do all of that stuff. And you had to do all that stuff consistently in order to maintain a particular power level. Governments are the same thing. There are fundamentals that go into the way a government operates in order for that government to maintain and, let's say, balance out, aid the political issues, but also deal with your main responsibility, which is how do we keep society coherent? And how do we keep a primary mission, which is maintaining the public? When you lose that, you fucked up. I'm saying the US has gotten to the point where the political parties doesn't give a shit about what the public thinks or wants. And I'm saying Europe is very similar in regards to the way it handles its political affairs. If you have to throw somebody in a cage to quote unquote save democracy because that person is so popular, then you've missed the boat. That is true in Europe. That's true in the United States. All right. I'm going to call this a day. This is Pink Rose. Hoping for Gaza ceasefire to hold. Agreed. Palestinians to get aid and the rest. Where's Ted Raw? Dan Kovalik. Ted Raw was here on Monday. Dan Kovalik was here. I think he was here last Thursday. I could be wrong. I think he was here last Thursday. So both of them were here. Ted Raw doesn't really have a set schedule per se. And Dan, yeah, I always appreciate Dan. But yeah, we spoke about it. We did speak about it. So there is that. What is this? Bobby Fischer said that he was aware of these. What did Bobby Fischer say? Bobby Fischer went nuts at the end. Khazar pilgrims. I don't know what a Khazar pilgrim is, but Dan Kovalik. I'm sorry, but Fischer. Yeah, Fischer went nuts at the end. If you remember Fischer, and then he ended up breaking the law. There was some kind of sanctions or something that Fischer ignored in order to play Spassky at the end. So I'm not sure. How do we get here? Is because we refuse to accept that we are being played. Yes, there is the ruling class, and there is us. Yes, there is no right and left political leadership. Netter, I do think there's a political left and right, but I don't think they give a shit about us. I mean, like you would get the left saying we need to have humanitarian bombs, and you would get the right just saying we need to be a hard ass. Both of those things equal the same thing. They just cut it in a different language in order to con whatever particular audience that they're going for. So yeah, I guess I agree with you. Yeah, agreed. China belongs to the dawn of history, to great river empires, of which Egypt and Babylonia contributed to our origins by the influence which they had upon the Greeks and the Jews. Cherie, fair enough. You went back way in time. You went back far in time. Well, Democrats are not the left. That is true also. Lao is, yes, agreed. But they call them the left. I mean, it's just what they call them, but agreed. Obviously, they're not the left, not in any real sense of the word. The left was squashed. Yes, the left was completely destroyed. I will tell you this, though. In Peter Turchin's book, what is it called? The End Times. Turchin makes the point that part of the reason that the United States hasn't ripped itself apart already is because of FDR. That the New Deal was somewhat of a reset. Now, Turchin argues that it takes 200 to 300 years, depending upon the type of government that a particular society has, before the government gets to the point of having so many elites that it becomes ossified and incapable of dealing with real world environmental circumstances. Basically, you have an immiseration of the working class and the poor. And because they are in such bad shape and bad condition, and that there's no response from this kind of overproduction of the elites, that there's a conflict in those things. The political system, the media system, all of those things conform itself to kind of tell itself myths of how great they are and why they should get more money while the rest of the population suffers. And that you get people who are wannabe elites who, because you already have an overproduction, don't have the capability of getting into that political position of power. In which case, the wannabe elites harnesses the power of the poor, the middle class, the miserated, the misbegotten, and uses that as a political cudgel to go after the political system. I mean, he goes further. He says, like, the wannabe elites are the most dangerous people in the political system. So, yeah, agreed. The left was squashed, agreed, but there was one at one point. And, you know, at the point where the Soviet Union collapsed, there was no reason to put on pretense anymore. It's just, you know, why are we pretending? We can just do what we want. Now we can just be a naked oligarchy. Yeah, the left has been crushed. Look, as I was telling Dan Kovalik, something will change. It has to change. It's like, you know, maybe they get to this point where there's this kind of techno-feudalism where robots do the labor, the rich profits off of the labor so they don't need us anymore. in which case they can lock themselves away and just let everybody else starve. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Something fundamentally has to change, though. We can't keep going like this. So, Alexandra Black, you can kick my ass at chess because because I seldom now. Oh, you seldom play now. I hate to tell you this, Alexandra Black. I probably could kick your ass at chess even when you were playing. I am very strong, or the very least I used to be. All right. I'm going to call this a day. Like, share, subscribe. You can support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, buy me a coffee. What else? Super stickers. All of these things help. I think I've already said like and share. I'm going to call this a day. Good show. Oh, thank you, Charles. I appreciate it, man. Train Salat. I don't know what Train Salat is. Have a good weekend. Yeah. I got to be honest with you. This show, God, man, today was rough when to put together. Because first part of the week is really straightforward. It's like, all right, I know Mark is going to be on. I know Garland is going to be on. This week was difficult. Many of the people who typically come on the show were either sick, they were either at events, they were either out of the country, they were either dealing with illness that's more long-term. And so it's like, okay, what the fuck is going on? But the show came together after all. We had several new guests for this week. Giuliano was one. There was another gentleman that came on in the first part of the week, so that helped round it out. And there's always a rest week. Like, there's always a week where you have to rest your guests. Because I realize if you ask them every week, there's some people who come on every week. Ted Rawl will come on every week. Jeff Rich will come on every week. So there's some people who are like, okay, great. They come on every week. Not every guest is like that. And you have to give space in between and almost like an unofficial schedule. It's like they don't know they're on the schedule, but they're on the schedule. Where you rotate them. In the process of that rotation, you're always going to inevitably come up with a week where you're like, okay, how are we going to pull this week off? But invariably, it always comes through. But shit, man, some weeks are harder than others. All right. Ja would come on every week. He was on vacation. When I talked to Ja, he was like on the top of a bridge or something when I spoke to Ja. And so, yeah, he's a great guest. I would love for Ja to come on every week. He's a fantastic guest. But sometimes people go on vacation. Like, I'll give you an example. Arnaud, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I hit him up and he sent me a picture. He was like on a jet ski. It's like, okay, fair enough, man. Enjoy it. You have a good life. It's like, I'm the only one that don't go on vacations. But no, man, I appreciate all of them. All of them are fantastic. And all of them have made the show what it is. Can't do a show without them, right? And so, yeah, sometimes I go on vacations. And when vacation plus rotation week, oh, that's a hard week. That's a hard week. But we seem to have new people in the rotation. Ray McGovern, he's a fantastic guest. Kawakowski, she's another fantastic guest who's been really kind and coming back on the show. Warwick Powell, he's been another guest that has been really good. Jeff has been fantastic. I love that show, The Burning Archive. There's a guy who wants to come on about UFOs, but he's a little too far for the UFO thing. I only go as far as I can defend for the UFO stuff. And while I accept the whole SAP functioning stuff, because you can do that stuff in a lab, like OBEs, remote viewing, that type of stuff. That stuff can be measured. You can do it yourself and test it. There are limits. There are limits. And that guy breaches my limits. I've seen him do interviews. Yeah, I've seen him do interviews. He's not who I would get for this show. If I had a UFO show, no issues, but this is not a UFO show. But yeah, so far so good. All right. The reptilian. You know, I don't really believe in reptilians. Yeah, I don't believe in that stuff. Not in reptilians anyway. All right, guys, we're gonna call it a day. We are going to call it a day. You will be safe. You'll be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Well, it's later. It's later. That's why it's like 10. What time? It's like 10 o'clock here, and this has been a long day. Yeah, this has been a long day. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I'm going to say please support the content. And you guys have my thanks. I'll see you guys maybe over the weekend. I'm trying to get Mina Uncensored to join me. If you can join me, I'll see you over the weekend. If not, bright and early, Monday morning. Enjoy your weekend. Have a good one all.